See if I can get a better reception. 1 second. 1 sec.
Are you having a problem seeing me, you mean, or?
No, I dropped my computer a while back, so the screen's a little cracked. So it's a big loose inside, so its reception's good.
Yeah, that's never a good thing. Anyway, so we are live now. I'm just going to do a quick intro. Hey, everyone, how you doing? It's Canadian Libertarian. I'm here with Alex today. He goes by the name of Canuck Law on Twitter. And we're going to be discussing and debating the merits of mandatory minimum sentencing. I'll be obviously taking the anti-mandatory minimum sentencing position, and Alex here will be taking the pro side of the equation, or of the conversation, of the debate. Now, since you are the guest here, I'm going to allow you to go ahead and take your time. And like I say, this is an informal debate. It's not going to be structured. It's not going to be something where somebody's going to moderate and cut you off midstream. This is like I say, I'm a libertarian. It's all about freedom. So you do your thing, and I'll just wait till you're done presenting your facts or whatever you have to say pertaining to mandatory minimums, and then I'll just respond in kind. So go ahead, Alex.
I guess just to be clear, though, I don't think they're necessary for any and all things. However, for some certain offenses, I would argue that get away. That for some certain offenses, you would need to have them in order to, say, for some level of consistency, in order to keep faith in, like, Canadian criminal justice itself. Guys, behave. Like, for example, what I brought up on that Twitter thing, say murder, for instance.
Are you done? Are you want me to respond?
For example, if you didn't have a mandatory... Sure, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just waiting. There was a little delay. I didn't know if you wanted me to respond yet or not. But if you still want to go ahead, I'll wait.
Okay, like, for example, for murder, like, intentional, like, deliberate killing. If there was no mandatory minimum, then hypothetically, you could walk off with a fine or probation for that. I don't think for something like that, you could actually have confidence in your justice system if that were an option.
Right. So what you're suggesting that this, for this scenario that you're painting, basically suggests that the judge would be going against the fundamental nature of laws in regards to serious crimes, because we actually have jurisprudence and established law in regards to, as it pertains to things that are considered severe, such as rape, murder, assault with a weapon type of thing. So like I say, we already have laws in the country that actually, as a consequence of the conservatives, because they were very tough on law kind of agenda in regards to, like, serious crimes, which I suspect that is, if there's one good thing that I always agree with, is serious crimes should be dealt with, in a serious nature, obviously. But we've already have plenty of discretion. That's the beautiful thing about having judges with their individual discretion, is it's not a one size fits all approach. The beautiful thing about having independent judiciaries and judges is they can use their personal discretions rather than, a one size fits all blanket approach. And that's kind of where I'm going to, just to kind of let you know, that's where I'm going to be pushing back, because as far as I'm concerned, I know you brought up that it depends on the actual charges being laid. So you agree with mandatory minimums for certain charges, but not for others. But once again, if you leave that in the discretion of the judges, there is no limitation as far as the upper threshold, right? So if there's a severe crime such as a murder, I don't know if I've ever actually heard of. I'm sure there's probably a one-off. There are always outliers, but I can't even think off the top of my head any example where someone just got a fine for murdering anyone. And once again, even with the mandatory minimums, the minimums it's still considered a minimum, right? So for someone that actually took another person's life, if we're using that as the baseline example, even at the minimum, the mandatory minimums, they would still, I would imagine, feel like they got away. I mean, that's not the actual minimum sentencing that actually would be handed down to a murderer. As much as a fine would probably be better for them. But I don't know how you're going to lead up to the suggestion, which, like I say, because I've read the studies and there's multiples of them out there. I've never heard anyone from the legislative branches, whether the US and Canada, or even from the legal, like the judiciary branches, that have actually shown where there's actually a clear and concise, point A to point B, where if you use mandatory minimums, that's going to actually prevent people that commit the most serious crimes, which is murder. I don't see how a minimum sentence is going to deter someone from performing a crime that is considered like at the maximum as far as how you can harm other people or cause, well, death ultimately. So like I say, I still don't quite understand where you're coming at it from your perspective as far as like the mandatory minimum aspects.
Okay. Okay, well, let's set aside the issue of a fine then for a second. Without that minimum, like the base for a sentence could be incredibly different. Like, say one judge could decide, okay, maybe 5 years is appropriate. One could decide 15 years is appropriate. One could decide 40 years is appropriate for what is in essentially the same act, but obviously that's varies widely.
Right. But don't you think that that's the thing with murder, even in our criminal justice system, there are multiple variances as far as levels. So there's aggravated assault that leads to death, which is manslaughter, basically, or like accidental. They were looking to assault the person, but the person died maybe by some sheer fact that maybe they had some prior medical issues or there's a million different scenarios where we can drop where someone may have taken another person's life. Now, maybe they accidentally bumped into them while they were playing out on in a dangerous, trying to balance themselves on a high perch somewhere at top, and they messed up and it was an accident. So that's why that's where I'm trying to come at it, which is why, like I said, I find it strange. I've never actually seen anyone actually try to defend mandatory consent, because once again, there's no such thing as where you can say that someone's life has been taken and say that the facts pertaining to that case should allow for any kind of a blanket kind of punishment. Each and every example, this is based on 800 years of historical common law that has built up. Like I say, it took 8 centuries for us to kind of derive these understandings, because multiple past cases and scenarios that have run through the courts, which is you don't want to punish people needlessly or over punitively if it's something that it's actually not even, where's the corrective nature of it? So like I say, like to compare someone like you were saying, like if they charge them or imprison them for 5 years, 15 years, or 40 years. Well, don't you think there is a glaring difference between someone that, may have caused someone to, die as a result of an accident, or something that there was no malicious intent, as opposed to someone that just blatantly wanted to take that person's life because of some evil intent, or they're just a vicious kind of a person? Don't you think there should be some discrepancy there?
Well, they are different charges, though. Manslaughter, first degree, and second degree murder are different charges.
Yes, for sure.
Manslaughter, unless a firearm is used, actually has no mandatory minimum.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So like I say, every kind of example that you're pointing out, whether it's, manslaughter or first degree murder, you're still talking about examples of the case before the court, the facts that's going to be presented before the judge. There's going to be lots of variables involved where it's not, like I say, you have to know intent, right? Like I say, because things can happen that people could take another person's life, and it could have been through something that maybe someone like punched someone, right? Like in the head, and that person died. The person that was punching the person in the head obviously was initially initiating violence towards that person, and rightfully so should be charged or criminally punished or penalized in some way, because they did use preemptive force towards someone else. But the person that punched someone in the head, and let's say the person that was punched in the head had some kind of prior medical condition that caused them to die from, one punch to the head, more or less. Or like I say, and that's just one scenario. I'm just trying to think on the top of my head. I could think of lots more, but where the person obviously didn't have that malicious intent to take that other person's life. It just so happened that that was how it unfolded because of, like I said, unknowable circumstances at that particular time, or for that particular case. In that particular situation, the judge would have the ability to look, the past habits, behaviors. Did the person have any prior criminal record? There would be discretion for the judge to say, okay, this is someone that made a mistake or did something that did elicit a crime, and it was deemed a crime, but is it worthy of, punish them up to, let's say, 40 years, as you suggested, up the higher end of things? or even just the mandatory minimum. Let's say they create a floor of 5 years. Does that person, is there really have these punitive actions, are they really, first of all, corrective and retributive as far as like making the community whole? Like, like I say, I'm trying to figure out, because it's not just the pretense of the punishment, but is you have to just, like, if I'm going to do anything, I have to know what is the actual consequence and effect on the other side. Everyone likes to act benevolent. We always want to say we're against the bad people, but once again, this is where the nuanced aspects of the justice system, like I say, which took 800 years to learn to understand these, the presumption of innocence, right? And only using punitive measures or punishments that are reflective and conducive with the actual crime that's been committed.
Right. But I am distinguishing between, say, first-degree murder and manslaughter, because I realize there could, yes, somebody died in both cases, but there are very different circumstances. Like obviously, there'd be much more of a public interest for, say, first degree than for manslaughter, because there's all that intent and premeditation.
Okay, well, actually, so we can clarify, maybe just paint me a scenario or an example where you would say, where you could come up with an idea, because like I'm trying to figure out like where you're coming at as far as the mandatory minimums. I'm not against harsh punishments or penalties for people, like I said, who have been malevolent or vicious or took a person's life with, you know, ill intentions. I'm saying, what scenario, what kind of scenario can you paint for us? So not just for me, but for anyone else that's watching this video, where you think the mandatory minimum sentencing would actually, like I say, be corrective in nature. It's obviously not going to be prevented, because once you've gone to court, well, the actual whatever happened, you know, manslaughter or murder has already happened. So you're not going to bring the person back to life. But I'm just as far as the utilitarian, I'm not even getting into the ethical standpoint yet. Just in the utilitarian aspect of mandatory minimums, can you show me one example at least where that would actually work out? And I, like I say, I'm not trying to just be pure adversarial. If I hear any information that makes sense to me, I always will align with like logical and objective and clear and concise information. I just want to know where you're coming at for that.
So, like, explain how it would be corrective morally or corrective in action wise.
No, like as far as the utilitarian, because like I said, we're going to leave the ethics aside for now, but just for the utility. So let's say, like I say, paint a scenario where someone has taken another person's life. You can use, like I say, manslaughter, first degree murder, whatever you want to use as the pretense or how that unfolded. But just show me one scenario where that you know, the subsequent aspects of having mandatory minimums would somehow do anything as far as positive. As, like I say, I'm just using an example of myself. I don't know how that could correct, you know, or prevent like another incident from happening in the future. Because it kind of tells me if someone's already willing to take someone's life, is mandatory minimum is going to prevent someone that already has the ill intention to take another person's life? Is it really going to stop them? Like as far as mandatory minimums?
Well, in terms of I think it's Rule 718 in the Criminal Code, principles of sentencing. It lists 6 of them. 3 of them are denunciation of unlawful conduct, deterrence, both specific and general, and where necessary, like protection of society.
Yeah.
So, in those aspects of sentencing, it's not like reforming the person isn't the consideration. It's we need to protect society, and we need to send a message. We condemn this, and in case anyone's thinking about doing it. So these principles are already in our system. Like, no, they're not going to turn you into a better person, but if someone else, you know, sees on the news so and so got so much time for this, you know, before doing it themselves.
Right. But once again, are you, I guess actually the best question to ask this that would clarify things the best, because basically those things that you suggested, those 3 paramount principles, the fundamentals of our justice system, it all pertains to, yes, corrective actions and punitive measures used as not just a deterrent, but punishment for past actions, right? Or
Right.
behaviors that are obviously not acceptable in any society or free or democratic society. But I guess what I'm saying is, because we're talking about mandatory minimums, like we don't want to get confused here. We're not talking about punishing people that have, you know, taken other people, but because mandatory minimums seeks to, like I say, create a blanket, a floor, a one-size-fits-all approach as far as the minimums, do you believe that there's no such thing as there? Do you actually believe in your mind that there's no such thing as an example where people could be charged or criminally charged and penalized with these mandatory minimums in an unfair and unjust manner just by sheer fact that there's mandatory minimum sentencing, rather than the judge having the discretion to actually decide based on the merits and facts of the case?
Well, I can think of one case several years back. In the U.S., there were two border guards who actually shot and killed an illegal immigrant drug trafficker. They got 20 years for that, even though that guy was armed. Which I thought, well, the minimum was 10, but for some reason the judge gave him 20. I thought that was ridiculous.
Yeah, but now we're not talking about minimums, though. Then you're talking about a judge that's chosen to go in excess, right? And once again, like I say, you're actually, I'm not sure if you realize it, but you're actually kind of helped clarifying. I think when we're done with this, you'll realize that actually the best case scenario is to have competent judges, clear and concise language contained within our laws, and allow the judges to have the discretion. Because once again, mandatory minimum sentences, what it does is it doesn't leave any discretion for any examples or any scenarios where the person shouldn't be punished in such a harsh manner. Because like I said, there's been many times, and I mean, you could look through lots of articles. You could sit here all day with Google and look through lots of articles where people were punished by mandatory minimum sentences, especially in the U.S. Canada, it's not quite as prevalent. The U.S. is much more. Of course, they have 10 times the population as well. Plus, they have the Second Amendment, so you have a lot more people that are armed in that country. But you're talking about a lot of people that have had to suffer and be incarcerated for, some of them, I'm sure you've probably heard these stories, 25 years because they've done a couple petty crimes, earlier on, and then they committed one that was, kind of somewhat, maybe you could consider a little bit more serious, but they were put behind bars and incarcerated for 25 years, ripped from their community, ripped from their family. And I don't know how that is actually a good case scenario or a good way of dealing out justice. And once again, just using blanket mandatory minimums. And like I say, I'll get on the other side. I'll let you respond. But like I say, I'm going to be dealing with here shortly there's been actually multiple studies, not just by the Canadian government, but from the American government as well. And even the very people that were the biggest proponents of mandatory minimum sentences have basically had to back away and walk back from some of their initial big government, we're hard on law. We're going to be tough on crime, because they've seen that actually the people that are malicious in nature or have true ill intent toward others, most of the time, like the laws could be down here or up here or the real people with criminal intent and nature, they don't necessarily worry about the consequences. And as what we're seeing today, a lot of the ones that actually want to do the most heinous of crimes, they just take their own lives or they stand, with a dozen officers firing at them and let the officers take their lives for them. But one way or the other, none of them actually goes through the court system. So like I said, we got to get back to the basis of what we're discussing is where does mandatory minimums actually prevent people or at least attempt to prevent people from carrying out heinous crimes such as murder?
Well, if someone's is intent to do it, then they're intent to do it in that in the context, if you decide, okay, it's beneficial to me to somehow do this, I mean, okay, in that sense you've made your choice, but sorry, just what we said earlier, no, I would agree for a lot of, like, especially the non-serious stuff, I would totally scrap minimum sentences, like for a lot of the very minor stuff. But my point, what thought I brought up before, was it's for the more like the very serious stuff there needs to be, and if nothing else, for some level of consistency. Like, and if honestly, if you're not going to get like minimums from, say, Parliament imposed on the criminal code, then because judges set their own, and then those decisions become precedent for other judges. If it's not the Parliament setting a minimum, it's going to be judges doing it, because they will decide, and then those decisions become precedent for another one.
Right. So I guess what you're suggesting then, and I'm just, like I said, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth here, but just to clarify are you suggesting that those who write the legislative laws and create these mandatory minimums that actually don't actually deal with individual cases, right? Because usually that's a federalized thing that comes down from the central aspect of government. So are you suggesting that, you know, the legislators have a much better pulse on these kind of activities and a better, or that's a better method to do it, just like I say, just create legislation, create a one size fits all approach, rather than leaving that to the independent judges who deal with these matters, these cases? Like, because that's what I'm kind of hearing here, because judges, like I say, judges have the discretion, whether there's mandatory minimums or not. The judge has at his disposal and at his discretion, or hers, depending on the judge, to use whatever means, like I say, the punitive measures to deal with each particular case. And because we have multiple levels of courts, so you have, you know, you can appeal it to the appeal court. Now, the U.S. and Canada is a little different. Here in Canada, we have the Court of Queen's Bench, then you have the appeals court, then you have the Supreme Court of the particular jurisdiction, so Ontario and New Brunswick, and then you have ultimately the Supreme Court of Canada. So you've got multiple levels. Like if there's discrepancies as far as what you were saying, let's say a judge did, now fine, I've never heard of, but let's say, like, let's just use a hypothetical scenario, as you were kind of alluding to earlier, that the judge hands down too lenient of a sentence. There's already, like, you're allowed as a prosecutor, right? Or as the persons that were the family involved that can pursue that further and appeal the decision, right? So we already have the appeal processes in place to kind of deal with any situation or circumstances where maybe the corrective course of action, or maybe the judge deemed the case in not such a beneficial manner that was aligned with what has happened or to the family involved, or maybe any hardships that they may have had to incur. Well, I mean, they've obviously had to incur personal hardships, but there might even be financial hardships. So like I say, there's already lots of places in the law where you can deal with these kind of scenarios, like as your suggestion, without using anything as it pertains to mandatory minimums.
Okay. So would you argue that no sentence, no offense whatsoever in Canada should have a mandatory minimum?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that having a one size fits all literally leaves out all of our justice system. I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but North American, the judicial system, and going even back to Great Britain, which is where a lot of our adoption of our laws come from, was, like I say, from England, Great Britain, is built on not just the presumption of innocence till proven guilty, but also by individualism. You know, there's lots of places all around the world that use collective guilt and collective punishments. But those are always referred to, even by people in our own countries, as dictatorships or authoritarian regimes. What separated us, the West, as they call us, from the barbarians or the dictators or the authoritarians was that we treat each other, or we're supposed to, historically, the precedent of Western post-Enlightenment era values in conjunction with, like I say, the history of common law, English common law, is that we treat each other as individuals. And you carry that right through to your legal and your judicial system, so that nobody has to worry about like a big net being, because really when you're talking about mandatory minimums, you're not talking about that. So if you're talking about like a pyramidal structure as far as like punishments, up at the top, that's your worst, your 50-year mandatory. Like, once again, you're dealing with here at the very, very bottom. You're dealing with the very bottom. So like I say, whether it's drug charges, murder, all of them, you're basically trying to take the people that apparently are somewhere down way close to the bottom, not the ones at the top, like you're saying, the ones that really we should be concerned about. But these kind of scenarios, these kind of situations where there's a lot more nuance, there's a lot more facts to the case than just a simple matter of dude pulled a gun. Like the easy one is the guy that's caught on video camera, right? Pulls a gun, the other guy's unarmed, maybe running away, and the guy shoots him as he's running away. And as long as you know that there was nothing leading up to that circumstance, well, that's a pretty clear-cut case. But because, like I say, every example of every crime out there, like I say, whether it's murder, drug offenses, or gun charges, or whatever, all kinds of examples they come up with, is each and every case should be dealt by the facts, and not just the facts contained within the case, but once again, how that situation unfolded, and was there malicious or malevolent intent, or was it just something that happened because of unknown variables? Like I say, that allows the judge. The beautiful thing about having leeway for the judges, which is what all of like I say, all of history of law has, until mandatory minimums is only something that's come around within the last 50, 60 years. And like I say, people even, and just in that time frame, though, they've all seen, and all the studies have come out and shown that actually these mandatory minimums, even under the utilitarian aspect, aren't proven to actually do anything to deter people. Well, I mean, look down. If you want to use the U.S. as an example, still all kinds of gun crimes happening, right? So it doesn't seem, the mandatory minimums doesn't seem to be actually helping as far as deterring the ones that actually have that malicious intent. So once again, I'm still trying to figure out where the mandatory minimum actually plays into your promotion of such. Like, why do you think that that's going to benefit us in any way?
Well, again, I'm only advocating for mandatory minimums for the extremely serious stuff, like I did drugs or whatever. Like, I thought, like I don't care. I'm in jail for that. But I'm talking like like very serious things, such as like, say, drug trafficking or murder. It's
okay, but if you were okay, let me just say this though, because when you say that, you're saying something. This is why consistency has to matter, and not against you, like I say, but this just going forward when you're trying to talk about this stuff. If you want, like, credit, you have to speak from, because basically what you're saying is if I was in charge, then no, the people that did the drugs, oh no, they're okay. I don't find those people bad. But there's lots of people, as you probably realize, that there's lots of people, that have the exact opposite mentality. They think the people that are dealing drugs, oh, they're the worst people ever. That's why they have mandatory minimum sentence for drugs. Even myself, that we have mandatory minimum sentences in Canada for impaired driving. Now, I was driving my ATV. I was living in rural New Brunswick, just to give you a quick breakdown of my own particular situation. I was riding an ATV. I'm big time into the off-road machines. I've always enjoyed that kind of stuff. And like I said, I was on a trail in New Brunswick. I won't drag the story out, but I was charged with mandatory minimums. I was a truck driver, long-haul truck driver at the time. And the judge even said when he was handing down the conviction, sorry, Mr. Hunter, but due to mandatory minimums, I have no discretion. And so I lost not only was I criminalized, given a criminal offense, never harmed a soul, never, matter of fact, in the entire course of my entire adult life, I've never harmed a soul from anything I've ever done. And the judge obviously recognized that, which is why he preempted the actual sentencing with saying, yeah, sorry, Mr. Hunter. He knew he was basically destroying my career based on just political edicts from legislatures. Now, I get it. The emotions will be reflected and heightened much more if someone was killed, right? As opposed to, me having my entire livelihood destroyed. I seen that. The emotional response is much higher. But once again, laws aren't supposed to be built on your emotions or your own personal opinions, not even mine. Like, there's lots of things where I would suggest, hey, if somebody did something that I don't like, sure, if I was king for a day, right? Oh, I would like to. But that's the whole point of our the jurisprudence and the legal system that we're supposed to have in the West, is that we don't use pitchforks, right? We don't just go out with the mob and lynch people that we don't like, or even if people commit crimes like you're saying, like murder. That's the beautiful thing about having a justice system that has discretion. Each judge to have the discretion is the people that do commit these heinous crimes should be rightfully punished. But we shouldn't have any area in our justice system where there's such a large net that you can catch up a lot of people from a lot of circumstances that would be actually most of the time the community, because you got to remember, people aren't isolated. Well, some of us are. I can't say that as a blanket statement, but every person, just like every family or anywhere, when you talk about like a victim involved, there's also a family for anyone that's accused. There's also extenuating circumstances that can affect the community from the person that's being punished or penalized. I know from my personal example, where I lived in rural New Brunswick, there was probably only like 24 of us in that whole community. Now, it wasn't a very big community, but that actually worked for a living and provided for everyone in the community. They eliminated one of the most prosperous or most productive people in that community by sheer fact that I couldn't even afford to live in my own home anymore, because I lived in the country in a rural community. So I don't have the option, like some people say, oh, you just go get a job elsewhere. When you live in the country, like I said, there's circumstances, and that's just mine. And like I say, it's a different, but there's going to be a myriad of times where you're going to find these circumstances where people are going to get caught up in these mandatory minimum nets and punished severely or overly severe unnecessarily just by sheer fact that the judge does not have any discretion. Like I said, it's not about what you're suggesting or alluding to. I'm completely on board with definitely people that have malicious intent, ill intent, and have actually caused great harm or brought death to someone that, you know, should have never had to have been placed in that circumstance. I'm totally on board with it. But once again, I think that allows, because I believe in individual freedom and liberty and the independence of a judiciary or a judge, I believe that each judge, and because we have that multiple layer system as far as our judicial system, I believe that corrective actions and measures can still take place to protect us from those people that are truly threats in the society without creating that big wide net.
So, do you hypothetically, do you think that, because you said you wouldn't have mandatory minimums on anything, do you think that putting a mandatory minimum on first-degree murder would create a huge net of people to be swept up?
It can be, and I'm sure there's many examples that you could point to where someone has been charged with first-degree murder, where the unintended or the external circumstances surrounding that particular case. Well, like I was even reading a few in this PBS special I was watching the other day just to kind of do some refreshing, was yes, there are many people that have been charged with these crimes, and without having, like I say, someone might have even done malicious intent. So let's say, you know, you were a child. I remember hearing one example where someone that was sexually assaulted and molested by a relative, and the person, even when this younger child got a little bit older, this relative that was sexually aggressive and assaulting this younger person continued that even when this person got a little bit older, and this person retaliated by taking that other person's life. Now, I'm not saying it was a good idea for that younger person to take that you know, the sexual molester or whatever, you know, predator, whatever you want to paint him as. It was not a good thing. It was not right for that younger person to take the older person's life. But once again, at least in that scenario, you can kind of understand where, you know, it would still meet the parameters, right? Because at that particular time, he wasn't being molested, right? So like I say, so there wasn't the actual physical act at the time, but he sought to retaliate against his abuser. And like I say, not a good scenario. I wouldn't like to see anyone placed in that position regardless, but you can kind of understand where a judge's discretion to maybe be a little bit lenient on that person would actually make sense. Hello? Still there?
Okay, so on an emotional level, I can understand that. It's if they're killing the person, it still would be murder. Like on an emotional level, yeah, I get the appeal, but
no, but it's not even emotional appeal. It's the fact that the person was actually just, you know, in their mind at the time, as was suggested anyways, that they were doing that to prevent any future abuses, right? Like I say, not saying it's a great excuse or not, but once again, we're still actually, from what I'm hearing, you're still not actually defending mandatory minimums. You're just defending that the person should be punished in some way. Like, once again, do you not see where the mandatory minimum leaves out all that discretion?
what? Well, you mentioned individual rights. What about group rights?
There's no such thing as group rights.
You're kidding, right?
No, I'm not kidding.
Try
How can you have a group right? Give me a scenario where there's such thing as a group right.
Try not paying taxes for a few years. See how that works out.
Who not paying taxes?
You try. You try.
Me, right? You're talking about me, right? You're talking about me, right? I'm an individual, man. There's no it's just no to me. It's just me. So what group rights? Individual rights covers it all. You ever heard of Ayn Rand? She has a really good expression that helps clarify things for people. If you care about minority rights, the individual is the smallest minority on the planet. So there, like I say, even a forest, people can say, I can say forest, but what does a forest contain of? Lots of individual trees. So once again, you have to deal with, do you just deal with people? I guess what you're coming at it is, so do you believe in collective punishment? I guess that's my question back to you. Because you're saying group rights, so you believe in collective punishment just based on, I guess, what people's what are we dealing with? Skin color, race? What?
No. You're you're that's not what I mean at all.
Okay, can you clarify
This
for me?
the state absolute like the well in this case the state would be the group. They absolutely do have rights over you. And like I said, you try
No,
not
the
paying.
state doesn't have rights over me.
Do you obey traffic laws?
No, traffic laws have nothing to do with the state. I would obey traffic patterns, or I would obey just not getting into accidents. I would do that whether I lived here or India or any place around the world. There's lots of places around the world where actually they don't have the same kind of traffic laws. Would I still be proactive, make sure that I'm driving defensively, not running into people, not running over people, not no,
But
I
if
don't get my morality from government, man. I get my
I'm
morality from like
I'm not talking
understanding basic universal ethics, right?
I'm
Don't
not
hit, don't steal, don't harm other people. The
I'm not talking
state, you're suggesting that the state, meanwhile, the state, would you know what the government is? Government is a monopoly of force or violence in any geographic area. So you're saying the people that already start out from their very baseline position, right? The people in government start of their baseline position is I'm a representation of a threat of force or violence. I'm going to use that to tell you how you're supposed to live. And then you're saying that anyone that doesn't follow the political edicts of these people, they're the bad people, but the ones that are using the gun to force their and impose their ideas on everyone are somehow, that's benevolence? Is that what you're suggesting?
no. Groups absolutely do have rights. And like I said, try not if you don't think the government has rights over you, try not paying taxes for a couple of years. See how that
Okay.
works out.
Okay, we have to actually see, this is when we get into debates. This is where you actually have to understand and define the words. Now, I don't get to, and you don't get to. So, do you know what government means? I mean, you can pull it up right now. I'll wait. Just type in your Google search there and find out. Like I say, you're talking about people who have some presumption that they have authority over you. Do you believe that someone has a higher claim to your life than you do?
No, they do have rights over you though.
How do they?
Because if you disobey those laws, you can get fined or arrested.
Right? That can happen in a dictatorship too, can it?
It's well, it would still be
Would you
rights.
consider the mullah or whatever of Iran to be your rightful ruler? If you like, let's say you move to Iran, or let's anywhere in this this world, everywhere you go, do you just automatically assume that there's certain people that just have natural authority over you?
Well, morally perhaps not, but legally they would.
But what is legality to you? Is it just the political edicts, or like I said, or is it supposed to be? See, to me, legality is the history of English common law. That's what genuinely legality is, and how that legality was, understood and created and built upon for all those centuries was testing these kind of hypotheses and theses out. So when someone, like I say, there's universal ethics built into our common law legal system, which is that you're not to be harmed, like as long as you're not using preemptive force or violence or theft, coercion, rape, or I'm supposed to be allowed to go do whatever the heck I want, as long as I'm not causing any harm to anyone else. But the way we look at it today, the laws that you're suggesting is political edicts. If you're talking about like I say, English common law, then it means it is genuinely built on morals and ethics and the understanding of the rights of the individual. And even the U.S., when they set up the Constitution, I wish Canada had done it. Actually, we did do it, actually, tell you the truth. I did check it out. And actually, even our own, now, the pretense they use is what's called God, right? Because most of our countries were founded on Christian values and principles. But whether you want to use the abstract concept of God or just the sheer fact that politicians don't own you, all of our laws even state within our founding constitutions and Bill of Rights that our rights are inherent and inalienable and not granted to us by politicians. They're granted to us by sheer fact that we're born. Just like in the animal kingdom or anywhere that you would ever talk about, you're born to be free, Otherwise, you're to suggest that people should be born in some kind of a slavery or bondage. No, we're born to be free. Now, there are some people definitely that always seek to impose their mandates, their edicts on others. That's what every tin pot dictatorship, king, monarch, pharaoh, everyone through all of history that's ever want to seek to control and dominate large areas of their populations, they always come up with excuses as to why they should, right? But once again, we have to tie in the utility and the ethics into it. And I don't see where you can ethically suggest that somebody has a higher claim or authority over me than me.
Well, like I said, like try not obeying traffic laws or try breaking the law. Try not paying taxes. Um,
But
state that
you're
does have
once
right,
again
like,
okay.
may have wrong.
Prior to this October, if you know smoked marijuana or grew marijuana, you could be locked in a cage too. Are you agreeing that just because politicians said that, hey, that was their political edicts, then we're just supposed to abide by what they say? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, no. Can I just hold on a sec? No, I'm not. Didn't agree with a particular law. Like I'm for decriminalizing marijuana. But my point being is that morality or not, they do have rights over you.
How do they have rights over me?
Well, prior to October, they could, for specifically for marijuana possession, you could be criminally charged. That
No,
is a
but that's not rights. That's power. I mean, if I walk out to a 98-pound weakling here, I can overpower him and take his wallet and beat him up. Matter of fact, I can lock him in a cage for doing something I don't like. Doesn't mean I have rights over him, does it?
well. Then the state would assert their rights over you.
But okay, once again, you're using the term the state. What is the state? Can you point to the state, or can you only really honestly point to a bunch of individuals like myself that are tangible human beings, fallible, just like every one of us? No such thing as a perfect human being. So what do you mean by the state? Can you at least give me, because there's nothing. When I asked you that, you can't point to a state, right?
Like you're talking set of laws or the government itself.
Even laws, you can't even say laws, because once again, there's such thing as just common laws, right? Everything that's built on universal ethics and morality and legal jurisprudence, like through past. So like I say, we can all, that's the thing about negative rights and as it pertains to our judicial system and our legal system. So I have the right. So as a negative right means I have the right to be free of someone else using preemptive force, violence, coercion, theft, rape, and all these things. But we can universalize that. That's the beautiful thing about, like I say, English common law. We understood is that the proper laws are not just ethical in nature, but they're universal and consistent, because we can all follow them universally without any contradictions, just like with any kind of scientific endeavor. The minute there's somewhere along that equation that doesn't align with proper math, just like with our legal system, as long as there's it's consistent in not just morality and transmorality, like what most of the bases of the West are built upon. The only people that I've ever heard try to argue about that is people that are postmodernists or subjectivists who don't believe that there's any such thing as morality. And those people, well, they've already beat their arguments down just by sheer fact of saying there's no such thing as right or wrong. If you're a subjectivist or a postmodernist and you don't believe there is such thing as right or wrong, then now we're just arguing about opinions, right? But I think you do at least acknowledge there is some universal ethics involved in the way of how laws and justice should unfold, right?
Well, you mentioned several times individual rights. Now, my point is there is a such thing as group rights, and even in the criminal sentencing, there are at least 3 provisions that stress group rights over individual rights: denunciation, deterrence, remove offenders from society where necessary, and protection of society. Okay, I guess that's 4. No, and those rights are specifically to maintain like to protect, like, for society's well-being over the individuals. Yeah, like putting someone in jail for something, for say murder or trafficking or whatever. Yeah, that has nothing to do with rehabilitation. No, it is to condemn what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
If you're considered a threat, well, obviously to remove you from society, because those sentencing principles are putting society's interest above yours. So group rights is already codified in Canadian sentencing.
Well,
It's
actually, you
no,
can't
it's
even.
really not about individual rights, not at least not completely.
Actually, you can't even say that, because if you just, once again, if you use the utilitarian aspect of it and you consider the cost of housing people for 25 to 40 years, if you just want to use the utilitarian aspect of it, hey, a 20-cent bullet, whole lot cheaper than 25 or 40 years of jail, right? So once again, like, of course people should be punished, but the reason why we have all these, or at least historically have had all these methods to make sure that we were doing the right things as far as dealing out, punishments appropriate based on the actual crime committed was, like I said, the history of English common law, the morality and understanding of ethics, not just from philosophical sense coming all the way back from Aristotle, but once again, even just by sheer fact of our Judeo-Christian background and heritage. So once you combine all these things, like I don't think any of us is going to argue against, like I said, we got to stay away from the fact, of course, we want the people that have killed other people to be, but we're kind of getting a little bit in the weeds here, because once again, we're supposed to be talking about mandatory minimums. And you're saying like we're kind of getting into the group rights thing, but once again, there's no such thing. What group are you talking about? Like how can you, like, it's easy to say group rights, but how do you translate that into the real world? If someone's going to kill someone, chances are they acted, under, like, some 3 or 4 people probably didn't hold the trigger for them. Like that person probably, did that crime themselves. So you deal with each other as individuals. Like I have a family. When I'm mad at my son, let's say I'm mad at my son, Aaron, I don't, just say my mother, my grandmother, my other son, my wife. Oh, that's it. You guys are all, you're getting the same punishment as Aaron is because I'm mad at Aaron. Like, once again, what are you talking about? Group. We deal with each other as individuals. Don't you, when you're out there in the public, and I'm sure you have friends and family, don't you deal with each one of them as individuals themselves? Or do you just collectivize them that if it's a girl, well, like all girls are the same, we're going to treat all girls the same? It's like, I still don't get where you're coming at it here.
That's not really well, the criminal justice, like at least as far as like trials and sentencing, that is about essentially punishing for crimes, and partly in order to maintain some level of consistency. At least I would be more concerned about the very serious crimes, and also I guess I would take the argument, like, how do you maintain faith in a justice system if, for example, murder, there was no mandatory minimum? Like sell this to the public. How would you do it?
I don't have to sell it. There's, like I said, hundreds of years of jurisprudence and examples where people that have committed murders have been punished and penalized accordingly. Some of them maybe even without mandatory minimums. Like once again, even without mandatory minimums, some people could still be caught up. Maybe the judge was, having a really bad day and maybe overly punished. But like I said, that's the whole point of having, appeals courts and being able to challenge that to a higher authority. But once again, the mandatory minimum suggests that everybody gets like a blanket statement. Once again, like I said, this all comes back to whether it's, dealing with it in the case as far as whether it's murder, rape. Every case should be dealt with based on the severity and the facts, the reasoning, whether it was, like I said, whether it was a direct result of an accident, or whether there was malicious intent, or maybe it was retaliation for some other past thing, as I was alluding to earlier. But once again, when you have no mandatory minimums, it allows the judges to have the discretion to punish, to a severe degree, to a lower degree, or somewhere in between. So having judges' discretion allows for that. Like if you want, like I say, there should be this person punished at least this much. Well, if you leave that in the hands of the judge, it allows them and affords them that ability to make that determination on their own. And once again, if it didn't work out properly, then once again, you can appeal, and there's all kinds of processes, like I say, that you can follow up to try to correct even some mistakes by the judges, because that's going to happen. Like I don't have faith in judges, just like I don't have faith in politicians to create a one-size-fits-all approach. Like I said, it really should come down to allow each and every case to be dealt with based solely on the facts pertaining to that case, not because someone else did something and we use that emotion as a means to, oh, now we should just punish everyone. I'm not sure. How old are you actually? I'm just curious there, Alex.
34.
34. Okay. Cause yeah, you're quite a bit younger. You'd probably be, yeah, you're at the top end of the millennials. Cause I know myself as a Gen Xer, I'm 48. I grew up with this stuff, and I seen, even when I was really young, it was the lazy way of, whether it was through parenting or governance, and And it's quite hypocritical. That's the other thing, like I was pointing to or alluding to earlier. The people that work for the government, they get paid by forced wealth and income redistribution, theft. Yes, taxation is theft. And their very precepts or their very premise of their job is they use preemptive force towards people every day. Like that's their job. And yet they tell people like, don't do this. It's like, I remember growing up, whether it was parents, my own parents or other people or the church groups or the teachers in school is don't like when I grew up, the teachers were still allowed to strap you right on your hands in school. And it's like, if you ever got into a fight in the school, they'd be saying, hey, don't hit that kid while they're beating the living crap, like smacking your hand 12 times on each hand, like, black and blue. Right. Or, like I said, and it still happens today, or the scenario where somebody did something wrong and then the whole class gets punished, right? That's collective and preemptive punishment. That's what mandatory minimum is basically what I understand, perceive is the boomer generation that we're all about the what if. Ooh, something bad could happen. Let's just punish everyone just in case, right? They've carried that right into our judicial system. And it's not normal, man. Like I know it seems normal now, but if you grew up in if you were raised by wolves, you would believe that it's probably normal to be raised by wolves, but it's because of your environment that you actually could possibly, I can't imagine, once again, I'm kind of putting words in your mouth. So hopefully you'll defend yourself against anything I'm saying, but it might sound like it's logical to admit, but collective punishment does not, like I said, I respect individuals. That's why I would never want to use any blanket kind of collective punishment towards anyone, because I realize that the people who are doing the bad, they're the ones that need to be punished. Not everyone else. We don't have to send a message to everyone else and punish everyone else for the acts of a few.
Honestly, you're completely straw manning me here.
Okay, well, go ahead if you I said.
I'm not suggesting everybody should be punished for the acts of few. No, not at all.
That's what mandatory minimums are, though, man.
No. People. No, I'm not talking about everyone should be punished for that. No, that's something else completely. Mine is everybody commit, like there needs to be some consistency for everyone who happens to do that certain offense.
Are you saying that everyone that does that offense has done see, that's once again, you're leaving zero nuance for the facts of the case.
Answer me this question.
Yeah.
If there was a 2-year minimum for first-degree murder, would you oppose that?
First degree, I've told you, I oppose all mandatory minimums at all, because not only, like I say, the ethical and the utilitarian aspect of it.
So a 2-year minimum for first-degree murder, you'd be opposed. What about?
Yeah, I would expect if the person. Okay, let's paint the scenario that you're trying to say here. Someone that committed a heinous act and they killed someone, outright murder, first degree, like you say, no good excuse. I want more than 2 years. I want probably 10, 15. I don't know. Like I say, I'm not a judge, but I would want a whole lot more than the mandatory minimum. Wouldn't you?
But you just told me that you would oppose a mandatory minimum of 2 years for premeditated murder.
Yes, 100%. I said they deserve a whole lot more than 10 years or 2 years. Sorry.
I'm just talking as a floor, as a basement punishment. You would oppose putting in a 2-year minimum for murder.
But like I said, without mandatory minimums, the judge would have his discretion. He wouldn't have to deal with. You've never lived prior to mandatory minimums. That's what I'm seeing here. Is you've never. Judges actually, like I said, judges could still punish this guy that killed someone else or this girl that killed someone else. There's nothing to prevent the judge from punishing the person that killed another person. So mandatory minimums, with or without, could still be punished.
Yeah, but with at least some sort of minimum sentence, you would ensure that the person would get at least 2 years, and or whatever that minimum is set as. Like,
okay, so let's go with the scenario you painted then. So this guy that killed someone, whatever, and he gets 2 years. That's actually, as far as I'm concerned, if that's all you get for killing someone, I think we'd have a much higher murder rate, to be honest with you.
So you would argue that locking someone up for murder could be a good deterrent.
Well, I mean, the severity of the punishment, right? That's kind of the point of having an independent judiciary and a legal system that deals with things based on the facts of the cases. The ones that are deemed severe should be dealt with severely, right? The punishment should reflect the crime. That's literally what I'm saying, is the punishment should always reflect the crime. Mandatory minimums does not reflect the crime, because the scenario you're painting is someone that's murdered someone. And I'm going to, like I say, I'm based on the way you're talking, I'm suggesting that someone that's actually, because you said first degree, someone that's actually did it with malicious intent. Well, that two-year mandatory minimum isn't going to be help to keep this person out of the community long enough to even, I don't think, remotely try to correct them or punish them in a manner that would be befitting of the severity of the crime.
Okay, what about a 10-year minimum? Would you support?
Once again, it would all be 10. That's why if I were a judge, I couldn't even come up with a scenario that you could paint where I could say, okay, here's the punishment, because it would have to be dealt and based on the entirety of all the facts pertaining to that individual case. I don't treat people as groups or collectives. If I was a judge, I would deal with every single case, like I said, based on the facts and the merits, what the intent was, all the everything that was presented to me in the courtroom by all the witnesses, by all the testimony. And then I would try to conjure up, and even then it would still be subjective in nature, because even with mandatory minimums, that's just creating the floor. It's not doing anything to tell the judge who should be penalized or punished more. The judge still, even with mandatory minimums, still has to deal with some form of discretion. All you're doing is creating that blanket floor that doesn't allow for those few opportunities, or those minority of opportunities, where people are needlessly overly punished, incarcerated, when it didn't, like I said, didn't do anything corrective as far as society, didn't benefit anyone. There was no real need for it. And it actually costs us as taxpayers a whole lot of money for nothing. So like I say, that's why I always defend individual rights and freedoms, is because if we deal with each other as individuals, then we can hold those who are, the worst and have malicious intent among us, we can deal with them in a proper manner, but then we don't have to collectivize and punish and penalize people that maybe don't need that mandatory minimum.
You say collectivize as if it's some like entire group of people.
That's what mandatory minimums does. It doesn't. There's no mandatory minimums doesn't allow for any leeway, right? That's what collective punishment is you're creating a blanket to cover everybody. Just like you're trying to argue. Here's the crazy thing, and I don't know how you're not figuring this out, but you're arguing for murder. So you're using, like I said, the fact of murder, but yet you don't defend mandatory minimums for drug charges. Don't you find that that's an inconsistency?
For drug possession, no, I actually wouldn't support minimums. For
right,
trafficking, yeah.
No, go ahead, continue on.
And as for collective, no, if someone, no, you refer to this as collective punishment. No, it's not like, say, 10 different individuals happen to commit intentional murder. I wouldn't be punishing them as a group. No, each of them would have committed a crime which, according to a set standard, would have a certain punishment. I would just be holding everyone to consistent standards.
Well, no, but
I'm not suggesting that, there must be like equal or minimum things for each thing. No, we have to have a certain standard, but that everybody should be held to that same standard. And that for mandatory minimums for serious offenses, is that it helps ensure that there is consistency.
Okay, well, before I continue on, because I'm just going to let everyone know. So this one here is from justice.gc.ca. So this is the Justice Department of Canada. I'll post all these in the link of the description of the video below. This one here is another study from, and it's all relating to mandatory minimum penalties, their effects on crime, sentencing, disparities in justice system, expenditures. Anyways, I'll post a link to this one, another one by Department of Justice Canada. We got another link here. This is a PBS. It was a special they did, 5 charts showing why mandatory minimum sentences don't work. And the last one was, this one is from prisonpolicy.org. I believe it's another US publication, but once again, it's all in PDF form, so you can download it, read through the thing in its entirety. But basically, all these studies, and these are people that are actually in the justice system, and no one has, there's a reason why they're going through justice reform in the US. Well, if they could finally get their act together, is we've had enough time, folks, after all these years to see if mandatory minimum sentence are actually effective in doing anything that the presuppositions or suggestion that the people that advocated for them initially, and like I said, the utilitarian aspect, it's already been proven to work. And it's not just me, it's not my opinion. It's, like I say, the studies by the very governments that implemented them that have shown that they don't actually work. And then just based on the ethical and moral standpoint, once again, I'm the kind of person that I believe in dealing with everybody as individuals. I don't look to collectivize or throw everyone on the same proverbial bus just based on what some political edict suggested that was deemed a crime. Because once again, there's so many scenarios a person can paint where someone could, take someone's lives, smoke a plant, drive a ATV, whatever. And there's all kinds of scenarios that you can come up with where people can use these mandatory minimums to overly incarcerate, penalize, and punish, and ultimately actually cause a lot more harm to society than good. Because like I said, in my own personal anecdotal experience, and this, once again, it is just anecdotal and subjective in nature, but just talk to anyone that's ever had to deal with mandatory minimums and sentencing themselves, and they can show you that I can say in my own personal experience, actually the society I lived in was actually more harmed. Nobody actually benefited because, once again, I didn't actually cause any harm to anyone. And they use these mandatory minimums, but because Alex defending it for murders, I get it. And it's easy. That's the easy one, right? To defend it for murders, because we're usually mostly compassionate and moral people, most of us anyways. So it's an easy appeal to our emotions, to appeal to our basic instinct to want to defend people that have been needlessly harmed or had their life taken from them, right? So it's easy. But once again, that's that slippery slope. Once you go down that slope where mandatory minimums are something that you should use, well, look at the world we live in today. That's once people accept it, that's that death by 1,000 cuts. And that's how the authoritarians have worked throughout, well, especially in modern democracies. In the old world, the typical authoritarians, well, they would just come down hard and they'd use a lot of mindless brutes to enforce them. Today, they want to trick your mind first. They want to get your mind first. They want you to believe that they do everything they do. It's always under benevolent means or terms. But yet, like I say, the people that are creating and conjuring up all these laws are the ones themselves have chosen to go into politics to supposed to be your ruler, to have some presupposition that they have a higher claim of authority on you and your income. Because that's another thing. These people, to pay for all these programs, they take from us, right? So at least if you had the ability to voluntarily contribute to these, whether I can get out from underneath the authoritarian nature of some of the politicians in this country, I'm actually forced to pay for things that I completely disagree with. At least I think that people like Alex, like if you're all about mandatory minimums and paying for harsh punishments and incarceration for people, then at the very least you'd be willing to step up and pay for all the money that and the costs that are entailed, because that's how most of us base our decisions, is on economics, morality, and what is supposed to be considered actual laws. Not based on subjective preferences, because basically what we're suggesting, like, which is why you're not hearing me say anything like, if I were, because I don't want to be the ruler of anyone. I don't want to suggest that I should be the one that gets to determine and dictate how people live. I'll stick with, like I say, the history of English common law, the presumption of innocence, and allowing judges discretion to deal with every situation, every crime that's brought before their court based on the facts and merits of that case.
Just one thing. I never suggested I don't believe in presumption of innocence. I never suggested that.
Okay, no, you're right there. No, you're 100% right. Sorry if I wasn't necessarily saying that you don't believe in the presumption of innocence. That we haven't actually even touched on that per se, but I'm just saying, as far as mandatory minimums, I get where you're trying to stick with it. I get it. Hey, man, I totally understand. It can't even be. I don't envy you for wanting to, or for even trying to defend government and mandatory minimums. Matter of fact, most lawyers, I actually applaud you for doing it, because most lawyers wouldn't even try it. Okay, they wouldn't even try it.
Well, forget the murder and drug trafficking. Let's go white collar for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Section 380, which covers fraud. when Stephen Harper was still prime minister, he amended it so that there's a 2-year minimum for fraud if the value is over $1 million. And like to commit a $1 million fraud, that's pretty freaking serious, I would say. Like,
Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. What's Trudeau want to put our debts and deficits for each year? You say $1 million? I'd say what, 18, 19 million is a whole lot more than $1 million. Actually, at this point, that's the thing a lot of people aren't thinking about today is all these debts and deficits. Who do you think is going to pay for them? It ain't going to be any of us. Nobody's got enough money to pay. Why do you think they keep going up? No, they're trying to economically enslave the unborn. Yet you're defending I don't understand why people would want to defend these people. They're the worst of the worst among us. I would actually trust you more than I would ever trust the people that are now ruling this country or propagating themselves through our legal or legislative systems. Sorry, I don't have faith in politicians because I actually understand the very premise of their jobs and their occupations. Just like a thief. If a thief was coming into my house to tell me that, hey, you shouldn't trust your son, he might steal a dollar from under your a loonie from under your or out of your sock drawer or something. Well, it's like, but you're a thief, dude. I'm not really. You're kind of you're accusing someone else that they might do something, but you actually do that as the very basis of your occupation. So, like I say, apparently you have a lot of trust in politicians. I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay. This is another straw man. I am not.
No, it's not.
I'm not.
Legislators created mandatory minimums. Judges didn't.
No, I'm not at all. You mentioned the whole thing about massive deficits. No, I think that's an absolutely horrible idea. Like it is. It's our kids and grandkids will be paying for this.
Exactly.
No, but no. The point that I was making regarding, say, fraud, being now under Harper's Law a 2-year minimum. Okay, suppose you're approaching 60 and you've got retirement coming up soon, and some unscrupulous accountant in your company decides, you know what, screw it, I want to take your entire pension plan and just flee the country. And it happens to be several $1 million. Now, set aside, hold on, just hold on, let me finish. I think we all could agree that for someone who bankrupted a company or who stole people's retirements or their savings, I think we all could agree that denouncing that and punishing and discouraging people from contemplating something similar is in a public interest. I think we can agree on that far, right?
100%. Matter of fact, see, that's the thing. You're going to find that it's actually, there's no disagreement with it. Well, only thing I have a disagreement with is creating this one size blanket approach. And like I say, whether apparently you haven't, and hopefully you'll take the time after this, because I know this is what I do. This is how I've ever learned anything in my past is don't even go by what I'm saying now. If you don't want to, just take the time on your own at your leisure. Like I say, all this will be linked in the description of the video, and just look at it. It's been proven to not be functionally ethical or even utilitarian as far as creating like this floor. Just allow judges to have discretions. Everything that you are appealing to, like as far as like punishing the fraud, like I say, drinking and driving, like that's even me. Okay, I was on my ATV on the trail, but that's not to suggest that I don't want to see the people like the habitual drunks, that are, and I've seen them. Trust me, I've lived in rural New Brunswick and I've lived in big city Toronto. I've seen it from every angle you could possibly think of. I'm totally on board with punishing the people that get completely, inebriated out of their mind, go out there and kill a family of 4. But once again, that's dealing with the facts of the case rather than, once again, dealing with a situation where you have to create mandatory minimums that snares someone like myself that's never caused any harm to no one. And the only reason why they even bothered to even, normally they wouldn't even look for you if you're out on the ATV on a trail. You could have a few beer out on the trail years ago because nobody was out there as far as cops. But now they made it so they want to have a registration. You have to register your ATV. You have insurance, your ATV. Then they want trail passes, which just more government revenue. That's all that is. But because they want that government revenue, that gave them an excuse to now have police out on the trails, policing the trails. Once again, I was no threat to nobody, having a few beer. But because that's another thing, they create these floors, because what do you think these BAC levels are? Like breath alcohol concentration, 0.8, 0.5. Basically, they say if you have one of these numbers, and once again, just like mandatory minimums, just pick an arbitrary number out of the blue. and they say this somehow deems that you're impaired. Some people, like, you may not make this argument. There's people, though, that will make the argument, oh, yeah, you're impaired if you're at 0.08. That's not true. That's to suggest that every person that drives has the same level of confidence as someone that's got 1 million miles driving long haul, been racing and drag racing cars and bikes and motorcycles and snowmobiles for basically all my entire life. I can drive a wheelie with one hand standing on the seat for miles on end. I'm a little bit better than the dude that, you know, maybe just had a couple beers, never drove in the car before. So once again, every time you create these floors, this one size fits all you end up doing is punish and penalizing. Not every time. Sometimes you might snare the bad guy, right? But once again, our jurisprudence and our common law said back in the day, we used to believe it's best for 1,000 guilty men to go free than to convict one innocent man. That used to be how that was the beautiful concept when we were actually still understanding what morality means as far as our legal system. Now it's completely upended and flipped upside down to where let's just punish everyone as much as we can and hope that that's somehow going to create a much fairer, better, safer society. But if you look out there today, I don't think it's actually done anything. Well, I mean, not just me. Like I say, the studies have proven that it's actually causing a lot more harm than it's having as far as good effect in our culture and our societies.
You said the whole 1,000 innocent men versus 1,000 guilty men versus 1 innocent man.
Yeah.
That's presumption of innocence, which again, I don't contest that at all. That's a different issue altogether.
Yeah, but the guilty part, see, this is the thing when you're talking about mandatory minimum, because technically I was based on, like I say, and see, you're going by the state as being the arbiter of the laws, right? So based on the state, the government, I did, according to them, 100%. I broke their laws. My breath alcohol concentration was in excess of that level that they've set out, right? I did consume alcohol. Was I impaired? Hell no, not by any stretch of the imagination, but because they've made arbitrary mandates and edicts that suggested that I am, based on nothing other than just, once again, I am holier than thou, and therefore I decree, right? Kings in the past did the same thing. So now, like I say, I can be punished. So my actually, I was like, based on, put it this way, if we still lived under actual genuine common law that was all about, you know, proper morals, ethics, and actual dealing out justice properly, that wouldn't even be a crime, because a crime prior to, just like I say, within just the last 100 years, well, not even the last 170 years, like since most of these mandatory minimum sentences and some of these harsh sentences have come into this, is English common law suggested that actually before this started into this modern era, is you weren't committing a crime. Like there might have been things that you could have been fined for, like civil infractions, but it was never considered a crime unless there was an actual victim involved. Nowadays, there doesn't even have to be a victim involved for it to be considered a crime. And because mandatory minimums are used for those as well, I'm saying that, listen, if we're going to be consistent, allow the judges their discretion, and the people that you're worried about and that I'm rightfully worried about too, like the ones that are, you know, the habitual drunks that are killing people out there on the roadways, or the people that are maliciously murdering people or raping people. Hey, matter of fact, I'm advocating for all those judges out there. Yeah. Hand down some serious punishment to the people that actually do cause a lot of harm to people in society. But mandatory minimums don't deal with that, because once again, just by sheer fact of the name of that term is minimums. You're talking about the people at the very, very bottom. And if they're that low on the bottom, what's wrong with allowing the judges to have some discretion? The ones that, you know, even if they're not as severe, at least the judge can base his decision on the facts pertaining to the particular case. That allows for some variability. Your situation or the circumstance that use blanket mandatory minimums doesn't leave any discrepancy. So in other words, that one person, which is what I was alluding to, that might even have been innocent, even if somehow, because that's the other thing, you can be found guilty too, right? Even if you're innocent. We all know that people have been found guilty in the past. Examples keep popping up all the time. And then they were found out later with, you know, DNA testing or whatever, that they were actually innocent. So once again, allowing for like that kind of freedom allows for these scenarios to be dealt with accordingly and properly. Doesn't mean it's always going to be perfect, but at least if we remove these abstract concepts and these blanket statements or these blanket fixes that really don't fix anything. It still allows for us to have a good, decent legal and justice system to deal with the people that are the threats to all of this, but at the same time allows for that discrepancy that protects that, 1 in 1,000.
Okay, I've actually got several points, like you've covered a lot. Okay, first, again, you're conflating presumption of innocence with sentencing. They're two completely separate issues. Second, you said that you trust judges more than you trust politicians. Who do you think appoints judges? And more to that matter, you can vote out a politician you don't like. How do you get rid of a judge?
No, I didn't say I trust judges more than politics. I said, at least when you're dealing with in the judges level, you have the ability to deal with, like I say, through the other different levels of the courts. But legislators, they don't actually deal with anything. They just write that legislation and they go. So they don't deal with each particular case. At least the judges are there to see what actually happened. Just like, if you were someone in a playground somewhere and you saw what actually happened, I might, as someone that was 10 miles away, say, oh, well, schools should have this policy, but I would trust your judgment as someone that's actually there and dealing with the actual facts, what actually happened on the ground and all. I would trust your judgment much better than someone that was far removed or 10 miles away from the actual incident, or even knowing how that event unfolded, or the case, or all the facts pertaining to how it unfolded.
Okay, if you have an issue with mandatory minimums, as an alternative, would you take? This is common in the UK and the US as well. There are other guidelines. Like, I know for the UK they have like a certain, like a reference point for an offense, then they have like a range, and then so mandatory versus aggravating. So it's quasi-mandatory, like this is the range given these sets of factors. Would you support that sort of system?
I guess in a way, depending on, like, I'd have to see how it was painted. But once again, like I say, it because I understand that there's no such thing as blanket, and that's what I see today. This is why this concerns me. Is not just the mandatory minimums, because I think about things from the macro perspective, not incidentals or isolated incidents. What I see today is it's a lazy way of doing justice. It's removing the judge's ability to deal with things, like I say, and juries, because that's the other thing. Juries should always play a role, as far as I'm concerned, because you can't always rely, as you were alluding to earlier, the discretion of one fallible human being as well. At least with 12 fallible human beings, you have at least the presumption that you have a better law of average as far as whether you're going to possibly get a better understanding of the facts involved, rather than just with one person. But either way, no matter how you look at it, whether it's the judge having, set before them let's say, if you commit this crime, there should be, between this range and this range, it should be a simple fact. Like I say, if the case merits, like I say, merits a severe punishment, and you can show, with facts and evidence presented towards the judge and going through the entire process, that society would be much better off by incarcerating this person for a long period of time, or whatever the actual sentencing entailed. If you can point that out, then that should be dealt with in a proper manner. And like I say, if it was too lenient, too severe, well, that's what the appeal processes can be for. But the mandatory minimum takes away all discretion. That's all I'm saying, is allow for discretion, because once again, we're all individuals. There's no such thing as even two murders. They could happen even on the same corner within 2 days. Both of them are going to have completely different facts pertaining to them. There's going to be so much information presented before the courts and before the judge or the jury that, like I say, to me, I would feel much better knowing that the judge has at his disposal some discretion to deal with it. Because, like I say, and no, I'm not, and no, I wasn't. I know what you're saying. No, I'm not trying to tie in the presumption of innocence but this is a fact, because we're dealing with political edicts that they're saying now. So mandatory minimums aren't just for, like I say, the murder. You've made your case for the murder. I get it. And you're still defending your stance on the issue that you think for murder, there should be mandatory minimums. But actually, let's get to the point. Is there anywhere? So I think you said drugs, you don't believe in it, right?
Sorry, ones that I don't believe in.
Like for drug charges, you said you're not a fan of mandatory minimums for drug charges, right?
For things like simple possession, no, I'm not.
Right. Right. What about if they're growing it?
Like manufacturing.
Yeah,
Um, are we talking medicinal or just like commercial use?
anything. It's weed. It's a plant.
If not prison, then some sort of fine. Like I said, I I have take a different view towards like using versus production. I
Okay,
realize I realize one leads to the other, but as far as scale of wrong, I do take a different attitude towards growing.
okay, okay. What about someone growing a plant though? What about it? Like I say, well, it's legalized now. If you go get your government license right now, as some of them are, you can go start a big warehouse and grow thousands of plants if you want. Why is it okay if the government says they're okay to do it, but why would this person that actually has been doing it in Canada? Because yeah, I've known people that sell marijuana. I've like I said, I've been alive in this country 48 years. Most of them are the best people you'll ever meet in your life, never cause any harm to no one. All they do is grow plants. They sell it. I've seen the transaction take place. The person gets their bag of weed or whatever. The person gets their money. It's a free voluntary exchange, no force, no coercion involved. Do you believe that person that grew that marijuana and sold it through voluntary means to the other person that they're bad, but the guy that does it that's got government permission, they're good, are they? And shouldn't be punished? Is that what you're suggesting? Sounds like you're getting your morality from government, man. It's a bad place to get your morality from, buddy.
Would I view somebody different who produces like several kilos versus someone who
I don't
consumes it?
care if it's 100 pounds. Like quantity doesn't mean nothing. Like I say, if the government can do it, like I say, if two people, one walks into a government building and they give them a stamp on a piece of paper that says, okay, you're allowed to do it. The other guy doesn't go ask the government permission, does the exact same thing, even if they grew the exact same amount, right? And sold the exact same amount to different people. Why is one a crime and the other not?
Well, I guess since weed's legal, then it'd just basically be operating without a license, pretty much.
Right. So you're literally admitting to me, man, and I'm going to point this out once again. You are getting your morality. Have you got any Christians in your family? Or do you come from an atheist background?
Some of them are Christian.
Okay, well, if they're those fundamentalist ones that I've had in my family, I could understand maybe why you've rejected it. But if there's one thing I have noticed a lot in my life is, and it does seem a lot of the younger people, and once again, I'm leaving all kinds of caveats out here because there's lots of I got two sons that are of millennial age, and they're totally different than most of their peers. But they get their moralities from, like I say, not just like my concept of libertarian philosophy, but just even the ethics and morality from the Christian foundings and the teachings of, like, the simple things: don't hit, don't steal. Like, so, but what I noticed today, a lot of the younger, especially younger people that didn't, because the older people did get a lot of their religion from Christianity because government wasn't as big. Government has become much bigger now. And what I've noticed is as government or as religion is farther and farther and removed from people's ability to learn for the morality, something always fills that void, that vacuum. And what I've noticed is government now. Government has taken the place of the churches, right? I've actually made memes about it. Is the government has become a lot of people's religion of choice these days. And like I say, if you base that, there's a reason why Christianity had to go through the Reformation, because if we had been relying on the Old Testament, we'd still be having a bunch of hypocrisy, right? That's why they had to do the Reformation, use post-Enlightenment era values and principles, and tie that all in with the New Testament so that at least there was some kind of moral consistency. But the state is, once again, you're coming at it from an abstract, which is might makes right, or whoever takes over the gun in the room, which is what government is, because that, like, whoever owns that gun, because, just like in any country of the world, everywhere makes their own rules, and we can point to 200 nations, they all have different rules. So if you're getting your morality based on the state or the government, well, you'll see that that's not universalized. It's inconsistent. A lot of it's immoral. Well, it is immoral because, like I say, the people in government, don't even align or abide by the very rules and edicts that they put forth and present. So, like I say, the government says you're not allowed to steal. Like if I went out right now and went to steal a bicycle from my neighbor, I've committed a crime. But yet the guys in government or girls in government, they can somehow force my employer or others to take a portion of my income as a prerequisite, as a consequence for them even starting their business. Right. So just like the mafia in the old days, the mafia did the same thing. It was the shakedown. Hey, you give me a portion of your business, we'll let you stay in business, but only if you give us a chunk. Government does the same thing. And I don't know anyone nowadays that would say, yeah, the mafia, they're the most moral people, right? Not really. A lot of murder, a lot of theft, a lot of coercion, a lot of bad things that happen, from them, just like with government. Like I say, these are the people that are actually the worst ones amongst us, yet you're trying to fucking use the state as the pretense for your morality. That's the only place I think where you're going to need some corrective. I think you seem like a pretty decent dude. And like I say, I'm not trying to give you a hard time here, but if you rely on the state for your morality, it's going to fail you at every junction because you're not going to have that consistency.
No. You are conflating a lot of things here, like a lot. Okay, first of all, I don't rely on the state for my morals. Second,
but hey, hold on before you go on, because you made a statement that actually is completely contrary to what you said earlier. Not that I'm trying to interrupt just to wreck your train of thought here, but you actually did say that earlier because you said if this guy over here sold pot, did the exact same thing, right, as the person that did it with the government license, you basically suggested and alluded to, well, at least the guy here, he's doing it legit because he got a license. Once again, it's just some guy. I mean, I could call myself the king of Canada tomorrow, right? If I could get a big army to take over, right? Let's say let's create a hypothetical scenario. I get a big army and I take over, and then tomorrow I'm the new ruler. No. Everything I write, everything I say is, hey, if I tell Alex, hey, you can do whatever you want, man. Don't worry, I'll sign that piece of paper that says you can do it. But everyone else, sorry, you can't do it because I didn't give you permission to.
Then okay, hold on. You got into a whole thing on like the government taking wealth. Yeah, like that's a separate topic. Yeah, I have huge issues with what's being like taxation levels and spending. Yeah, I have a huge issue with that. Don't get me wrong. But my issue, and I don't want to continue huge thing of is government is the idea of taxation moral? Like that's a completely separate issue. My thing when I brought up fraud is if you steal, if you go around stealing, and there's a huge amount, and I mentioned the Section 380, which is fraud, a mandatory minimum. Yeah.
But once again, you're not dealing with the fact this is why what I mean. This is why I know what it is. If you're used to dealing with people that just want to play politics, yeah, I'm going to be frustrating as hell because I don't think from the political realm. I think from the philosophical, right? The moral and the ethical, and like I say, even just the utilitarian aspect. So that's why it probably seems like you're having a little, because like I said, you have to deal with things from first principles. Because you're not going to have any clarity of thought or clarity of mind if you're dealing with things from the abstract or post the fact that, like I say, the state is already, like I say, and I mean, we can get into the fact, I mean, whether you agree or disagree, but the government, those who represent the state, they already break the moral code or the laws that they supposedly uphold just by sheer fact that they, like I say, write laws to dictate and control my life, steal my money, and give it to whoever they see fit, right? Force me to take care of other people when I shouldn't have to. It's my money. I work for it. Like I said, my labor, is a product of me being a human being. To suggest that any other human should have a higher claim to that is literally to suggest that I should be some kind of a slave. So they're already functioning from a realm where they're unethical, immoral, and now they're the ones that are putting forth and present that they're going to put forth these edicts and don't do this or we'll punish you here. Like I said, you have to, the only people I ever trust is people that are actually consistent in their morality. If someone comes at me, like I said, if a thief that's stolen from me 20 times in the past says that, hey, watch out, this guy might steal from you, I'll still watch out for this guy for sure. Cause I don't know this guy, but the guy that's already stolen from me 20 times in the past, sorry, dude, you got no moral high ground, man. Sorry, you're a fucking thief. What am I supposed to trust your word? I don't trust a politician because, like, I know exactly the very premise and the basis for their position, which is why I would never want to be a politician, because I've never sought out to control, dictate, and micromanage everybody's social and economic lives. I'm completely aligned with even the absence of any state. My whole life, like I say, because of my Christian heritage and background, I don't seek to use preemptive force, harm, violence. I don't look to steal from people. I don't look to and the government never taught me any of that. Never learned any of that from government. I learned it all from, like I say, philosophy, history, culture, and the understandings of the religious teachings that some of the people in my past gave me. And what I did is I used my objective mind to weed through all the crap that I knew was wrong. Like even some of those grandparents that taught me about religion, some of them think that the earth is 6,000 years old, right? I get it. A lot of people believe a lot of foolish stuff. But for me, for anything to be consistent, it has to run through my cranium and it has to come out the other end without any wrinkles, any inconsistency, and any contradictions. Otherwise, I'm going to reject it as a premise, which is why I reject mandatory minimums. I reject the pretense or the premise that some guy that gets elected by a whole bunch of other people in Ottawa should have some arbitrary control or authority over me. Now, I realize that most of the people in my country do believe that, just like people in the past, like under King, Edward, or a lot of the monarchs in Europe, people used to believe that it was right for the king to be able to take your wife to bed on your wedding night. The stuff people believed in history is crazy. But once again, the minute you place authority in the hands of human beings. Now, I'm not even a big proponent anymore, because like I say, I've worked through all this stuff since I was a kid. So I'm not a big proponent necessarily of Christianity, because I recognize the inconsistencies there. But I also understand that humans have to have some sense of morality, of authority, right? That's where we have to derive that from somewhere. And what I have learned as an older man now, and I've had a lot of great people that have come out with a lot of information to help me put all this together. To me, it's like a whole bunch of different pieces of a puzzle, and I'm just trying to put them all together and figure things out as best I can. I still haven't got the puzzle figured out, probably never will, but I'm trying the best I can. But what I've come to realize is, because we do have to have some kind of moral authority, as much as when I was younger, I used to reject the whole pretense of Christianity and stuff. God, this magic man in the sky, what? But then I realize now, especially with hearing people like Jordan Peterson talk stuff, is the minute you place it in the hands of humans, which is what government is, right? Is then you place it in the realm where, just like what you were alluding to earlier, it can become subjective in nature. So just like you were saying, like, oh, I'm not for mandatory minimums for like weed or whatever, or this or that, but I am for this. It becomes subjective in nature. Whereas a genuine moral or ethical or principle should be universal and consistent all the time, just like math. Like if there was some politician that could join up, hey, vote for me and I'll make 2 + 2 = 4.25. Well, think about how much that would mess everything else that we understand, right? Nothing would actually ever get done, because we wouldn't be working from a universally consistent moral or ethics, or even understanding as far as scientific objective reality, right? And
how do you get the actual consistency? Like, you say you're opposed to okay, just hold on a second.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that people should get, for the same set of facts, should get roughly the same thing. 2 judges in 2 different jurisdictions could look at pretty much the same case, and one could decide, say, 6 months, one could decide 4 years, one could decide 7 years for basic what is essentially the same set of facts. If you don't have minimums and you don't at least have very strict sentencing guidelines, how do you ensure any level of consistency?
Right. Well, that's what you're saying. You just pointed out that 3 different judges, which are 3 different individuals, would have possibly and most likely come up with 3 different sentences ranges for the same basic crime. So you're saying that there's already inherent fallibilities built in, right? That's what you're saying. You're admitting that there's inherent fallibilities built within the fact that you have human beings, right, dealing with these cases. I'm saying that I don't trust any of them. They all have potential to make mistakes. Every single human being among us are fallible and have the potential to make mistakes, which is why a one-size-fits-all probably lead to a whole lot more potentials for mistakes than at least having some variability, right? Think about it. If you had one option, right? If you went to the store and there was just one kind of bread, or there was 5, maybe that batch, you know, something got moldy and was contaminated or whatever. Having options, right? Having options, as far as I can't think of anything when you're talking about this stuff, having options is the best way to allow for leeway and freedom. The only thing that matters as far as like having a one size or like universality are the things, like I said, that are inherently universally consistent and can be adhered to without any trickery. So like I say, negative rights, right? Don't hit, don't steal, don't, those things, the things that we shouldn't do, those can be universalized. So morality and ethics, those can be universalized. Punishments, you can't universalize them because, like I say, every case is going to be different from the other. You probably would have a hard time, even though there's probably been thousands, hundreds of thousands of murder cases that have gone before the courts within the last century. You'd be hard pressed to even find two of them that were exactly, well, matter of fact, you wouldn't. You won't find two cases that have had the exact same facts and entire history of how that all unfolded. So like I say, allow for flexibility, allows for sentencing structure that is reflective of each particular incident. Whereas the one size fits all, it leaves no nuance. It leaves that person that may be punished needlessly because, once again, they might deem that person guilty. Let's say a judge had to err on the side of, oh, by technicality of the law, he's guilty. But in the judge's mind, and based on all the facts of the case, he probably realized that there's a very, 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 very good chance this person isn't guilty. But because of the way the law is set up, I'm going to have to punish him. Well, if the judge believed that in his head, if he had the discretion, he would say, you know, I'm not going to have a very severe like incarceration. Maybe we'll ask that this person maybe gets some, maybe they have some mental health. Like I said, there's I can't even imagine or conjure up all the different examples that you can figure of how these cases can come before the courts. But having variability allows that discretion. Like I say, it's not like that necessarily that scenario you painted where the guy gets off too easily. Well, there's all kinds of other ways that you can use, like civil suits is another thing, whether the person has money. There's all kinds of other ways that you can use to be retributive as far as getting your justice. I mean, I'll even use another two examples here real quick as far as my own life. My dad was beaten to death when I was 17 years old. He was out in British Columbia. He was murdered, literally murdered, like not just, you know, manslaughter, like now, but even under that scenario, as much as, you know, I probably wish that the people that were punished, and when it was going through the court, it was crazy because the judge even had this thing. He was saying, well, they weren't sure which one they were going to charge with first-degree murder because, well, they don't know if either one of them actually did the final blow, that because his brain, they kicked him in the head so many times with steel-toe boots on, his brain swelled up, and that's how he died. But they didn't know which one actually delivered the final blow. Now, I mean, if I wanted to get in the weeds, I could say, oh, you know, maybe if they had got an extra 5 years. None of that's going to bring my dad back. None of that's going to, you know, fulfill me. Like, I mean, it gives you that initial, I guess, that rush, right? Like, oh yeah, vengeance, right? Has it really? Like I said, I don't think it would have actually, whether he was both of them or one of them, because it was two guys and a girl actually, but she wasn't actually involved. It was, even if both of them had been thrown in prison for the rest of life, none of that was going to bring my dad back. Once again, I don't rely on the back end of justice and how that unfolds. I prefer to do things right. That's why I come at things from that philosophical sense. That's why I've raised my sons to be great, amazing kids. That's why I hold myself to a very high moral and ethics standard. I don't rely on judges. I don't rely on politicians. I don't rely on legislators. I don't rely on petty vengeance or seeing other people harmed. That's going to somehow fulfill my life in any way. That's the area of my mind that I see how people can go that way. Because when we're angry, we can go that way. It's every human has that. They can go to that dark place if they want to. We all can. We have that potential. We have that capacity. But like I say, mandatory minimums does not help in any way as far as getting real justice. That's going to help maybe the potential for something that's going to happen subsequent in the future. Because that would be ultimately what I would be concerned about. Is this person going to be a threat to someone else? I mean, they've already taken my father's life. That's done. I can't fix that. But what's going to be the best thing to help this person going forward? I mean, other than the only thing that I could actually say that would utilitarian wise prevent that person from actually causing any harm to anyone else is either killing them or locking up for the rest of their life. Because no matter if they do it for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 40 years, even if someone's punished and penalized for 40 years, if they haven't learned anything, if they're still just as immoral when they come out, they might very well be one of these recidivists that repeat and go out on another killing spree. So even under the pretense of the harshest incarcerations or punishments, you still can't create this scenario where you're going to fix society. Coming at things from, like I say, universal ethics, being morally consistent, proper justice, and allowing some discretion, allowing some variables is our best case scenario. And that's still not going to protect us all. You're still going to see there's going to be examples all the time where some was under punished or some was over punished. But at least if we have some form of discretion, it'll at least eliminate that one size fits all, which the authoritarians, they love the one size fits all because they don't have to do any hard work. Then they can just, what? Sorry, go ahead.
You didn't answer my question at all. Like, you completely went around it.
Okay, go ahead. What was the question? Sorry.
When if you say you have three different jurisdictions, each person with approximately the same facts, roughly the same, doesn't have to be identical, but roughly the same, commits the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Judge A decides 6 months, Judge B decides like 3 years, Judge C decides, say, 7 years. Approximately the same things. How, without any either minimums or at least pretty like set guidelines, how exactly do you ensure any sort of consistency? Because if you all leave it to individual discretion, like, how do you get any sort of like common sentencing thing?
But you're setting up almost so you're saying 3 different separate instances and everything unfolded exactly the same? Like, you got to really stretch to try to find that kind of hypothetical, man.
No, like similar. I didn't say exact, but similar circumstances.
So so what you're saying is if that exact case, but there was 3 different judges that were presiding over, is that what you mean?
No, like, you have 3 different incidences, similar, not exact, similar circumstances.
Well, then we can't see. This is what I mean. You're willing to go with the similar and then give like exact punishments. I'm saying similar is not exact. I am precise. That's why I'm about being precise and precision, which is why I would not create a one size blanket. It would be 100% determined, even if they were similar. Maybe that person does merit, maybe that person that did do that crime, but their entire history, let's say one of those people that you were saying that as you're painting the scenario, let's say their history was one of them out of those 3 was 55 years old, and for all the other 54 years of their life was the most upstanding, amazing citizen. They did everything for their community. They volunteered.
Like that's right. Like, at least similar, like, fact. Like, all the major facts are roughly similar.
But that's what I mean. I don't understand what you mean by similar. There aren't any facts that are always that similar. That's why we need variabilities in the courts, because people. The final result of someone being murdered, that can be similar, but how that situation arose, was the guy cheating on his wife? Like, none of this, like, you can't even paint any scenario in your head where you think that maybe someone did take someone's life, but there might be some kind of a just reason, or at least a legitimate excuse as to why that happened, that in absent of the fact that the prior incident that had happened, maybe they wouldn't have gone about it that way. Maybe they wouldn't have been looking to take someone. Like, that's what I mean. There has to be, there's no 2 cases or 3, as you're alluding to, that you're going to say that they're all the same and one should, or they should all be punished the same, because that's basically what you're saying.
But how do you ensure there's any sort of similarity, though? Like, unless you have, or at least on some end, a minimum, or at least guidelines on how to lay out the sentences. Like, how do you ensure any sort of consistency? Because unless you can have like similar, like very similar guidelines applied, no, I'm not saying this, like, everyone should get the same thing for everything, but it's the same set of rules and guidelines should be applied equally to everyone. Like, unless you have that, how do you ensure any sort of consistency?
Well, yeah, but we all have the rules. Like, we all know, like I can even go to my nieces that are 4 and 5. They all know that you're not allowed to murder. These are fundamental principles that we all understand, even when we're kids. And no one, I mean, like I say, I could go to the playground somewhere. Well, I wouldn't do that actually, but and find small children. And yeah, you'd find they all understand these concepts. It's not hard, man. Like, I don't know why adults try to make like things so difficult. Well, authoritarians usually do because they can't make their case without it. But all these things you're suggesting is we're all on board. Matter of fact, I don't even need a cop. I don't need a judge. Like if I was walking down, and actually this has happened. So this isn't just a hypothetical scenario I'm painting, but there's been times in my life where I've seen someone in distress and danger and being harmed by other people. I didn't call the cops. Didn't worry about, oh, well, don't worry, it'll get dealt with once it gets to the courts. Oh, the judge will fix that for you. Oh, I just go out myself and defend the person that needs defending. And even when I'm using like help or force against the other person to defend someone else or defend myself, I only use as much as needed or necessary. Like I've had people actually beat me up in my past. You know, when I was younger, I was quite small in stature when I was real young because I had to have a heart operation when I was 14. But I was bullied lots when I was a kid. But when I got older and I could, retaliate, even then I never sought to use any more force than was needed or necessary to prevent any other further injury or harm to me. So like I said, it should never, I just don't have, I think what it comes down to at the end of the day, I don't have that mentality where I feel, and I guess it's probably kind of good because I guess I could probably be a good little tyrant if I had the same mentality as everyone else, right? That, everybody should abide by my edicts. Trust me, I know better. Matter of fact, I could make the argument against a lot of people that actually I'm much more knowledgeable in most topics or subjects. But even then, I still don't want to presume that I should know everything or that I should be a legislator to suggest, let me write some legislation down and just create this one blanket statement and it'll be okay. I like I say, I could never presume to have such an ego to think that that's the proper way to deal with justice.
I'd asked you earlier if you objected to a 2-year minimum for first-degree murder.
Mm-hmm.
You still object? You object to that, right?
Yeah, I object to all mandatory minimums.
Okay.
And I also said though, if that was an actual murder, I would want the punishment a whole lot more.
I see. So would you object to that mandatory minimum because it's too, I'm guessing not because it's too lenient, because it's just, you just object on the principle.
Yeah, that's all. And not just on principle, on the ethical standpoint, but just by sheer fact that, like I say, all the studies that have been done, and if you can find that one that counters, actually, I was kind of hoping you would, because I looked for them and I haven't found any. But all the studies that have been done, and these are ones by even the people in government themselves, so hello, but none of the studies have shown where mandatory minimums have even shown to be effective as far as the utilitarian aspect of it. So I'm already against it based on, like you're saying, like the principle, right? And the moral and ethical implications that comes with it. But even on the utilitarian aspect of it, it hasn't shown to actually decrease, like even with the, well, once again, goes with the impaired driving thing. To this day, I still know people back east, especially in those small rural communities. There's guys that haven't had a license for 30, 40 years, drive all the time drunk. What the cops do, even if they throw them in the fucking drunk tank for a month or whatever, they don't care. They get free roof. And I've actually, like I said, I actually talked to these people. They don't care. So the ones that we're trying to catch, the ones that are truly the bad people in society, mandatory minimums or even harsher punishments don't seem to have much effect on them, other than if you go like I say, the only utilitarian argument I think that people could put forth and actually make a airtight case is, yeah, kill them or lock them up indefinitely. And you could make an airtight case as far as the utility of it. But then what kind of a country do we live in? We live in a full-on authoritarian police state. So once again, I'm the kind of person, and this is because I understand the history, is I prefer a little bit fear of some potential danger. My liberties mean more to me than the security. Because as you probably heard, even that's been alluded to in the past, you know, if you seek security over liberty, you end up with neither. And I mean, the reality is all around us, folks. The more the government creates more and more laws to restrict everything that we do in our social and economic lives, the more miserable, the more divisive, the more hate-filled and vengeful, and the more toxic your society becomes. No, just like when I raised my kids, I did it in a manner that, here's a few ground rules, kids. And it was, and they were, the ground rules were important. So like, you know, don't beat up each other needlessly. Don't, try to cause harm. Don't, you be sexually aggressive to girls. Do the good moral things. And actually, they were much better, and they grew up to be very well adjusted. The people that I knew that had that more authoritarian mindset, that raised their kids with a million rules, oh Lord, all it ever did was create these kids that they acted they were good, or tried to be good when they were around their parents, but as soon as they stepped outside the door, the worst hellions you've ever seen. Why that is because you create a toxic environment the more authoritarian you become. It's like I say, adopting some fundamental principles, like as I think you would adhere to and I would adhere to. I think we all do. I mean, in our daily lives, with the exception of a very, very tiny minority of people, I mean, especially in Canada, we go out our daily lives every day and we don't use preemptive force, violence, coercion. There's a small minority that do. But once again, let's just deal with those people as individuals, deal with each case based on the severity of the crime, and punish them based on the severity of the crime. And that'll at least give us at least the best chance that we don't trap and snare people like myself in these stupid nets that really don't affect the psychology of people that have evil intentions. All it really does is create this. It's like a false thing where, oh, look at how benevolent I am. It's virtue signaling. It's fake, man. It doesn't, like I say, and I'm the kind of guy, I'm all about caring about virtues, obviously, but you have to at least be reasonable in your approach. It's got to have some validity. It's got to be somewhere where you can show where it's actually worked, and no one has shown that it's actually worked. So I say, if it's not working, and if it's actually causing more harm than good, what's the point?
I think there's some more conflation going on here. Like you mentioned people getting swept. I was like, like the very like minor things, like, oh, someone shoplifts or someone tokes or whatever. Like I don't care about that. Like if a judge wants to hand out a fine or whatever. Like my concern is for like serious and violent things, having a minimum for that. The kinds of things which are serious that no, it's, as you say, a small minority of people who would be caught with. Yes, I support having mandatory minimums for extremely violent, like for say, like murder. I mentioned on the Twitter thing, like child sex offenses, massive fraud, things, not, it will not lead to a huge sweep up of people, but things which are very abhorrent, and it's a few people doing it, and they do need to be removed from society. Like I have no intention or desire anything to push mandatory minimums, collectively or like broadly across the thing. It's for a very small, limited number of offenses, things that we all agree are abhorrent. Those ones would merit some kind of mandatory minimum, and they're things that they're for offenses I'm sure you condemn as well.
Well,
like
yeah.
I
no, go ahead and finish what you have to say there, because
I've no intention of making like entire criminals out of entire sections of society. Like no, not at all. It's things that are really bad that all of us can agree are wrong. And in some sense, it's actually looking out for the well-being of society for such a things like murder, trafficking, major fraud, and that. Yeah, because to a degree, I want to know that there is going to be some sort of guaranteed punishment. Like I want to know that even if it is just a hypothetical case, I want to know that a murderer can't get off with 2 years, or I want to know that somebody who embezzles like the company for like millions won't get off with probation. Like it's those very.
But you're okay with Trudeau economically enslaving us to the tune.
Oh no, I don't get.
Can we start? I said you're an advocate of mandatory minimums. What do you think the punishment should be for politicians that economically enslave the unborn? Because once again, I mean, and I get it, man. And you know what?
We advocate for torture here.
What's that?
Am I allowed to advocate for torture?
Yeah, exactly.
No,
I wouldn't go that. I wouldn't quite go that far. But no, I get what you're saying, man. But basically, at the end of the day, I think what we're going to come down to, and how this is going to end, is you're advocating for something that you personally advocate for, and I get it, right? That's your personal opinion and your subjective preference on how it should unfold. Obviously, there's lots of things in my mind I would love to conjure up if I were king. I would like things to be done. But because I don't have that presumption of that I should know all, or that ego that thinks that I should create a statement that eliminates that independence, that freedom of judges to deal with each case based on the facts, I'm not willing to create a blanket for not for drugs, not for murder. Now for the murder and all that's like this, like the crimes you're suggesting, but we're dealing with severe crimes. Minimums aren't what we'd be worried about as far as that, because if you're getting to the threshold that it was so low on the justice bar that the judge has to figure, is there a threshold real low down here that we should have? Then like I say, it's obviously not the most severe crime, because if it was the severe crime, as you're alluding to or suggesting, then the judge would be way far removed from the mandatory minimums. Basically, we're just looking, what you're suggesting is, even in some hypotheticals where maybe it's not clear and concise, maybe we should at least create an area or floor for them. I'm saying you could, and they have, and 60 or so years later, the evidence is in, and it actually hasn't done anything to affect the kind of changes in society that they had originally hoped or wished for. So I do know that there's people such as myself, and I'm just one of many examples. Actually, I was thinking maybe I should even start a page of all these people that have been screwed over by mandatory minimums and see just how much traction that would get. But I have to worry about the people that do get screwed, because once again, I'm one of them. And I worry about that because I know how bad it affected my life. And that's the thing. I'm not alone. I'm not isolated. I'm not on an island by myself. It affected my family. It affected my livelihood. To this day, I've lost my career as a truck driver. There's just no way, with a criminal record and Harper making it so that you got to wait 7 years to get a, by the time I'm allowed to even start to do that, I'll be too old. So I've just moved on, and I've chosen to now do different. I went back into the construction field. It's a little harder for me because I'm an older guy, but hey, it keeps me in good shape, so I don't mind it too bad. Like I say, I'm resilient. I'll get through no matter what. But it's because of situations like me where I say, no, I don't want to see any more people out there. And even, like I say, even for murder, because I recognize that people can take other people's lives and not be malicious. Maybe they were abused in some form or fashion. Maybe there's lots of underlying extenuating circumstances that led up to a person taking another person's life. And maybe the facts contained within the case suggest that maybe that person doesn't necessarily need to be punished, in that kind of mandatory minimum. Maybe they just need help psychologically. Maybe they need something else. Maybe something else will make them be a better person going forward. Because if it wasn't done like what you're alluding to with the malicious intent, maybe it was just something because, like the kind of scenario I painted, that they were abused. Maybe there's other ways to deal with them rather than just, lock them up with some of the worst among us. A lot of times that's another thing too. You throw people that maybe aren't necessarily evil or have these kind of ill intents and maybe did make a mistake or do something that was wrong. Maybe incarcerating them actually might end up making them worse off, make them a worse person as a consequence, as a result. So that's all I'm saying. It has nothing to do with I would never be against holding people that have harmed other people to account. I'm all for that. I'm all for restorative justice and punitive actions and measures. I just don't want a one size fits all, because I recognize that it does leave too much open interpretation for whether it's judges or legislators to collectivize and penalize a lot of people that maybe don't necessarily need to be.
Okay, I want to make this one point clear. So you oppose any sort of standard or uniform treatment?
No, not standard. Like, what do you mean? As far as justice, you mean like the legal system?
As far as sentencing guidelines.
Yeah, well, I believe all the presumption of innocence. Everybody should be given their day in court. You shouldn't. Pardon me. Sorry.
Just sentencing. Like, do you believe this? Do you believe in having consistency? Like, I'm only talking sentencing.
Yeah, well, as far as, like if you're talking about, like, if you have like the scenarios you were painting earlier, let's say where, there was manslaughter. But like I say, each case is going to be different. But with manslaughter, yes, I believe there are levels. So you're not going to charge someone with manslaughter and, because of it being lower as far as the threshold, without, in comparison to first degree. No, obviously a person that's charged with manslaughter shouldn't be punished in excess of those who are charged with first degree murder. So yes, of course, there has to be some kind of structuring involved when you're talking about sentencing. It's just that it should be at least have some kind of variable involved where there isn't like a particular cut off. That's all I'm suggesting is, yes, there should be standards and practice. And that's actually what has happened through all of human, Western, well, English common law is that's how we figured all this stuff out all over hundreds of years. Is we figured, yes, some of these crimes, we should, that's why we have more than one charge for just murder, right? Is yes, some of them had ill intent and malicious, and someone that actually had in their head before they were even going, that's what their intention. There was clear intent that they wanted to kill someone. Whereas someone that got into a fight, like another scenario I painted earlier, and the guy punched a guy and he had some medical condition and he died. So yeah, I of course there should be variances there. I'm all for discretion when you're talking as far as sentencing. It just there should be no blanket that prevents the judge from having discretion. There should be no floor or ceiling as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the ceiling, well, the ceiling's already there, right?
I actually meant to ask
life is life. What?
I actually meant to ask you that question. You preempted me. So you oppose having a floor for ceiling. For just to take an example, say shoplifting, I think has a 2-year maximum. Nobody ever gets 2 years, but that's the maximum. Hypothetically, would you support taking the ceiling off and, in theory, making, I don't know, 20-year life for shoplifting an option, if you support judicial discretion?
Well, I mean, if someone wanted to write a law that allowed for creating a law that said you could get life for theft, well, I don't know how they'd ever pull it off, but let's say they did. Okay. What kind of a country would we live in if you had a judge? No, but like, think about that scenario if it actually played out and unfolded. CBC the next day, guy steals from local Loblaws, gets life in prison. I mean, that would be you're living in a serious police state there. And actually, if that was the case, I want to know these things so I can get the hell out of Dodge real quick. I mean, we're already getting bad enough as it is, but if we get to the point where they're starting to knock people up for life for stealing a loaf of bread, yeah, I'm definitely out of here. But no, but of course, for something like that, there should be some reasonable grounds. But once again, it doesn't have to be ground and entrenched on anything that's cold, hard lines. It should be just open to the judge's discretion, but based on parameters. And like I was alluding to earlier, based on the severity of the crime, because that's what English common law is built and trenched upon. Is your punishment is supposed to be a reflection of the severity of the crime. That's the thing where there's no mandatory minimums, but it at least gives the judge discretion to say, yes, if it's a loaf of bread, no, we care. Here's a $500 fine, whatever, probation, whatever, and be on your merry way, and hopefully you'll do things better going forward, whatever. But as far as having some kind of structure to keep it so we're in reasonable confines, yes, but that still doesn't, I'm still not advocating for floors or ceilings. I'm saying let's be reasonable. Like I say, in my own life, I could dream up a million scenarios where my kids will do something that I might not agree with. I don't have a structure. I'd like to meet the parent that has a list. Well, if my kid goes here behind the park and does X, well, he should get this punishment, or at least within this range, or if they do this, well, like I said, I just use my good judgment, morality, understand of morals and ethics. And like I said, also the reciprocal effect of, even with my kids or the society at large, if you're not going to lock them up forever, all right? Just like if I wasn't going to, lock my kids up forever, I'm going to have to deal with them at some point in time in the future, or society's going to have to deal with them at some point in the future. So I'm always going to make sure that each scenario, each case makes it so that everybody involved, the victims, the perpetrator, and everyone else, like I say, that's involved in the scenario, everyone at least feels like they've walked away, at least seeing that justice has been somewhat served reasonably. But once again, I can't even imagine where I could say this will work for every scenario. I can't think of it. That's why each and every case or scenario you could conjure up, I could think of a million different ways where you might find a way to do corrective judgment, or to prevent, or hopefully prevent some of those habits from continuing further in the future. I don't know. That's what a judge is all about. Like I say, he's supposed to go into every case with just justice on his mind and blind to everything else, and then just based on the facts. And if we teach our judges to do things properly, that's the other thing too. The judges aren't even a lot of it is through, like I say, they're having to enforce laws that are based on political mandates and edicts. Because like I've had judges that, like I said, that have said that to me. So a lot of judges today don't even like the fact because they have to go home every night too, right? These are human beings just like a lot of us, and a lot of them probably go home and drink real heavy because they probably caused a lot of harm to people needlessly because they have to follow the political edicts, but because that's their job, they have to do it, right? So that's even for the judges. I don't want to impose that kind of stuff on judges because I think if we teach them like if they go through the proper system to teach them what our natural laws are supposed to be, what the common law entails, the presumption of innocence, all that, everything that we learned since Magna Carta 800 years ago till now, if they understand all that historical precedent, which they're supposed to be getting as the very pretense of those diplomas lying the wall that tells them they're judges, if they've done all that work and they're competent, right? And that's another thing. We don't have like people going into school now based on like their skin color, or if we have good, competent people that are our judges, then, like I say, don't guarantee they're all going to do the right thing all the time. But that's why we have, like I say, multiple layers of courts to deal with those times that maybe it is done improperly. Okay, at least allows for that variable.
How would you get around precedent in that case? Like, for example, and I'll just throw this out. As I'm sure you're aware, drunk driving causing death is actually obviously a very controversial topic. Over the last, say, 20 years, there have been a lot of cases in the news. People who drunk take someone out, they're getting 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, which a lot of people, myself included, think is way too light.
Yeah.
But however, in subsequent cases, well, the judge will turn out, well, this person drove drunk in that case, they got this, so we now have a case where the judges relying on precedent where sentences, which I would argue are far too light, are now being used as a legal reference to justify even more ridiculously light sentences. I think the vast majority of people would say 1 year for, even if you are drunk, like getting out plastered, getting in your car and mowing someone down, 1 year, 18 months is far too light. But those things are fairly, it's creeping up the sentences, but I think we can agree that 12, 18 months is way too light.
So once again, this is where, we're universal. And that's why, like I say, the people that are in law really should understand these things. But what if it was to someone that was, I don't know, lighting up one of those vapes in their car, or looking at their navigation system on their screen, and the exact same thing unfolded, right? They killed, let's say, a family of 4. At the end result, the person, the family member or those who were involved in it, the same thing unfolded. You still killed, let's say, that family of 4. The difference is, instead of using the presumption that it was because they had drank alcohol, because that's another thing. Even most of the cases that go before the courts today involving impaired driving, never do they actually prove that the driver was impaired, because they don't have to anymore. They just have to measure your BAC level. They don't actually have to test you how you drive. There's no way they can even know. They just presume that based on some arbitrary level that you're impaired. Well, what about the person, like I said, how do you measure for someone that's, going to reach to turn their navigation system on, or like I say, drop the cigarette or their vape between their legs? How do you measure for that? Like, the scenario still unfolds. It's still the same kind of incident has the potential to happen. It's just that people use that emotion and base, and because MAD was very good with their ad campaigns targeting people who have a few drinks and stuff, they've literally got most Canadians believing that, people that drank alcohol and get behind the wheel, they're all just a bunch of, I imagine they got little scenarios where they all got little corns on them. They're just there. Oh yeah. Is there a family I can go mow down somewhere? Come on.
No, I don't think they're evil people. It's just.
But right, but that's what I mean. Like, you could be in an accident, even if let's say you drank 2 glasses of wine and you're a lady, you're at lunch, someone's walking across as a pedestrian downtown Toronto, and you are actually in excess of that. 0.8, let's say you're at 0.80 or 0.9. So you are arbitrarily over the limit, but it wasn't even sheer fact that you were impaired per se. But when the accident happens, let's say you run that person on the bicycle over because they were crossing the road incorrectly, you're already the one that's going to be deemed guilty because the sheer fact that you were drinking. But in reality, was that truly a contributing factor? Or was it the fact that the guy crossed the road on the bicycle in front of you and wasn't paying attention, and actually they were the cause of the accident, and maybe you weren't defensive enough in your ability to stop? But once again, if they can't show, nowadays everything's open to speculation and and subject to the interpretations of everyone now, because they can just say, well, they passed this or they were over this limit, therefore it must have been their fault. But like I say, you could say that for someone that was turning the radio, but it could also just be an accident. Nobody believes that accidents happen anymore. Everything thinks that there's got to be some intent. Everyone's trying to criminalize every activity that has potential hazards. Well, everything that we do, that goes back to that what if scenario, and that's what mandatory minimums are basically built upon, on that psychology of what if. Well, I mean, I can paint that what if scenario. If you want to go down the what if scenario, I can paint that what if scenario that would literally make it so that we should all lock ourselves in our own self-confined cell, and that's about the only way we'll ever be able to live throughout life without any potential harms, dangers, or threats towards us. Like I said, that's not the kind of world I live in. People got to start worrying about fearing everything, because your freedoms, even though your freedoms, you might have a different way you want to live out your life and enjoy your freedoms in your way, as you should. I want to do my thing. What we should all respect, just like if we were living in a household, we would have to if we were all living in the same household. If we're all going to live in the same country or geographical area, we should all have that same kind of understanding, is respect each other's autonomy, our individuality, and to stop using preemptive violence and force and coercion towards the other people, or punish them when no victim has actually been caused. Now, when you get to the point where there actually is a victim, so like the murder, as you were suggesting, then let the judges deal with it. All these other things, like I said, there's not even the mandatory minimums for drugs, like we were alluding to earlier. There's no victim there. The impaired driving charges, most of the times, there are times when there are victims, but most of the times when people are charged with impaired, there are no victims. So if we want to punish and penalize people for the what if, well, we should be banning smoking cigarettes, vapes, turning your radio on, using a navigator, looking anywhere. I don't know, eating your burger. I mean, and they're literally trying to do that now. So once again, you're only going to help solidify these authoritarians if you propagate a message where I should let fear control my emotions and allow these authoritarians to keep imposing their mandates on us. Then everybody will do that. Yours are obviously much better than most, because you're only more or less concerned about the murder. So I applaud you for that, and I'm with you there. But once again, everybody has their own interpretation, who they think or what activities that they deem should be denied of people or are dangerous or have the potential. I don't want nothing to do with that. I want people to be treated as individuals, respected as individuals, and the ones that do commit the crimes, we should all come together, hold those people to account. But once again, be fair, be reasonable, make sure that the justice is actually going to do what it's doing, which is actually create some real justice, instead of just creating this thing where the media or the politicians can say, oh, look, we incarcerated this person 40 years and we sent a message. But really, it's like you sent the message to that dude, but that's not going to prevent this other idiot from being a criminal. Just like people, when they talk about gun crimes, you can incarcerate someone for 50 years for using the gun improperly. Doesn't mean that a criminal is going to stop and say, oh, geez, there's a 50-year punishment. I was going to go kill that guy or rob that bank, but gee, I better not. That's not really how the mind of a criminal works.
Well, you mentioned a lot. Yeah, as far as the victimless stuff, yeah, like I do take a very different approach to it. Like hell, jaywalking is illegal, but I frankly don't care. Like, because I do, like, at least a lot of it is what harm is actually done to people and like to society as a whole. So yeah, at least on that part, I would agree with you. Um,
Anyways, well, I think we've pretty much covered most of it, and like it doesn't look like we're going to probably come to any particular agreement per se, but that's okay. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I just want to, allow you to say what you got to say and let me say. Now, if you do have anything more that you want to add, go ahead, and I'll wait for that because I don't want to shut you off or anything. So if you have anything to say, but as far as like for mine, I think I pretty much covered most of the points that I wanted to deal with, and kind of elaborate and expand on like why I come from the position that I take. So go ahead and finish off whatever you got to say there, Alex.
I guess I look at it in the sense that yes, the person, the circumstance of what they did, yes, all that should be taken into account, and the other flip side is, and yes, this is recognized in the justice system as well, especially for the more severe stuff, there has to be some consideration as well for what exactly is this doing to society? Like, is this proposing a danger? Is it sending a message that something very serious, we can basically shrug it off? Like, it's for the more like serious, violent, serious financial stuff. And by the way, no, I don't defend government spending. Like, there has to be, at least for some of it, there has to be some sense that yes, sometimes for the good of the population as a whole, the most serious things have to be come down particularly hard on. And at least for, again, like at least for the most serious things such as murder, there is at least a little bit of consistency and some comfort in knowing that at least there is some, like we can debate what the minimums should be, but at least there's some base level of what punishments for very severe things should be. So at least, like, I would not suggest all of it, absolutely not, but at least for the most severe aspects of crime, that there's some solace to the population as a whole, knowing that okay, there is at least a bit of consistency, that there's at least some guarantee of punishment, and yeah, like obviously we can debate endlessly what those minimums should be, but it's I would just say like, in order like for the society well-being, for some things there should remain punishments intact, and that's actually what I mentioned on Twitter those few days ago.
Right on. I think you did a good job there, Alex. Anyways, like I say, this is just something I wanted to put out there because it's something that people need to think about, right? No matter which side of the fence or what stance you take on the issue, this is something that at least, like I say, the best thing that can ever happen is at least get people thinking about these issues.
Right.
Because most of the time, as you probably recognize, people hear some political talking point. Sounds good, sounds warm and fuzzy and cozy, and say, yeah, let's run with that, right? Obviously, when you delve into these kind of topics, it requires a lot more nuance. We've actually taken a lot of time today to kind of delve into this. I'm sure we probably repeated, I know I probably have repeated a few things, and sorry if that's the case, but I just wanted to, like I said, I wanted to clarify things a little better so you understand where I come from. And hopefully you and I both, and everyone else that we talk with on a daily basis, how we're going to create a much better and freer society and much more healthier society is by doing all these things that are necessary before, right? To hopefully eliminate as much potential for dangers and hazards. And once again, what I've always learned in my whole life is if you walk softly, carry a big stick, have a live, let live mentality with the, well, let me just say by the walk softly, carry a big stick is don't ever, use preemptive force violence on other people, but if they come at you, if they do something to you, always show them that you're willing to stand in defense of yourself and others, right? So be a show of force when it's needed, but never preemptively. And like I say, have a live, let live mentality. Deal with people based on those understandable rules that are principles that we all kind of adhere to, even very easily, even when we're very small children and we don't fully understand the concepts. But if we stick with those most understandable principles that are universal in their ethics and morality, and create an environment where we lead by example and hold others to other individuals to account for their actions, that's the best way that we don't have to rely on the state. Like I say, crimes are still going to happen, but if we create just like in my family, if we create a nice, healthy environment, there's potential. There's always going to be potential, but the potential is much, much greatly reduced if, like I say, you have at least some universal consistent rules, laws, and ethics that everyone should be abiding to, and everyone does consistently, because that's the other thing. The reason why a lot of people will commit crimes because they see other people that commit crimes and they get away with it, right? So if we're consistent in our morality and we lead by example, I think that's our best way going forward, because politics, it's downstream of culture. If we create a nice, healthy culture in this country, politics and the legal system, well, their caseloads will drop tremendously because we'll have created a much better environment where we're not having so much potential for harms, right? Go ahead. Sorry, Alex.
I would agree with you on one major point, though. Particularly things like racking up like 10, 20, 50, whatever billion in debt per year, leaving that to grandkids, and all this transferring tax money into slush funds, like all stuff. Don't get me wrong, I completely think that's wrong, and I would think, hell, I'd not only lock up cabinet ministers for that, I'd actually lock up some of the bureaucrats as well. Like I don't want you to get the impression that I think that government corruption or waste is wrong. No, I think it's completely wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and if anything, I would want them to be treated as harshly as like the people who like in private companies who pilfer from the company, because obviously this is a much bigger scale.
Right on. Well, if there's one thing I know is, or there's a few things I can say. One, you're willing to have this conversation. Two, you articulated your points. And three, you seem like a pretty decent guy. So as far as I'm concerned, we don't have to agree with everything. Like I say, I'm more about the fact that like just like I say, in family or society, I'm more than willing to live with people that have lots of different ways they want to do things. But just like in a family, just like in society, we have to at least come to at some point in time, we can all argue and play politics for a while, but at some point in time, just like throughout all of history, we're all going to eventually have to come to the table and acknowledge, well, we're going to have to create some ground rules here, folks, so that we can actually live and cohabitate with each other peacefully and prosper without always feeling this overarching fear of reprisal for stepping outside the bounds of our political masters. So as long as we can do that, we can have these kinds of arguments, discussions, and debates. It's much better than joining these politicians and just finding these ways to impose their ideas, because they're not leading anyone with any kind of morality. Like I say, these are people talking on both sides of their mouths. At the very least, we have some credibility in the fact that we're at least using our words and trying to present our case, our facts in a voluntary manner and not trying to force them on each other.
Yeah, like I'd for people like who pilfer from government and who like leave our grandkids with hijab, like I'm completely in favor of locking them up. Hell,
Yeah.
I'd even go as far as to create separate crimes with like more extensive penalties. I'm totally think this is wrong.
Right on. All right, Alex, I
But just
appreciate you having this conversation with me, man. I'm gonna let you go now, and because, like I say, it's been a little while there. Yeah, it's been a good chat, though. I really enjoy it. And if you ever want to do this again, just reach out to me. And if you want to deal with another topic or subject, or even this one, if you maybe find something else and you want to maybe harden up your case a little more or something, I'm always willing to do so.
well, I think my points were pretty well made, so it's it would mostly be more of the same.
Okay. All right. Well, you have yourself a great day, Alex, and we'll talk to you again, man.
All right, see you too.
Okay.
Okay.